Should I start, Gcsi? Yep. Okay. Yep.
All right.
It's good.
Good morning. Right. So because of the late thing, I request Ray, we can kick off the meeting and then Ray start your, introduce Lance. Go ahead.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Ray Trigstad, Associate Chair of the Department of Information Technology and Management at Illinois Tech. Welcome to the 2025 GCSI Annual Conference, organized by the Global Cybersecurity Initiative and co-hosted by Illinois Institute of Technology and the Pan-Asian American Business Council. It's my distinct honor to introduce a visionary leader in the field of computer science and a driving force behind tech innovation at Illinois Tech. Dr. Lance Fortnow is the founding dean of the College of Computing, where he combines academic excellence with strategic leadership to shape the future of computing education and research. A renowned expert in computational complexity theory, Dean Fortnow is perhaps best known for his influential work on the P versus NP problem and for co-authoring the widely read book, The Golden Ticket, PNP and the Search for the Impossible, and real-world impact. Please join me in welcoming Dean Lance Fortnow.
Welcome everyone. First, I just want to thank Ray Trigstad for introducing me. And Ray is retiring from us after many, many years. I don't even know how many, many years, being an incredible force for our Information Technology Management Department and at Illinois Tech. So I just really wanted to appreciate Ray. Thanks very much. So welcome to the 6th Annual Global Cybersecurity Initiative, GCSI, not like apparently the username for your Wi-Fi, jointly presented with the Pan-Asian American Business Council right here at Illinois Institute of Technology's Chicago-Kent College of Law. I'm Lance Fortnow, as mentioned. I'm the inaugural dean of the College of Computing at Illinois Tech, and it's a truly honor for me to welcome you to our campus. Although this is we're really on the main campus down in Bronzeville. So we're proud to host this important gathering under this year's theme, Cyber Risk and Regulation, Surviving the Future. And I just want to give a really big thank you to Gcsi Paturi, who's the driving force behind this conference. So thanks, Gcsi. Now our college is nearing its 5th anniversary, and we've grown to become by far the largest college on campus with over 3,000 students and nearly 1,600 graduates next month. It's a very exciting time. It's been our college has come at a time of incredible transformation in computing, a real move from sort of logic-based approaches to solving problems to a very data-driven computing, as we've seen. So we've really focused our college on data, on learning how to use data, so AI, machine learning, statistics, data science, but also protecting data, cybersecurity. And that's been a major focus for us through our cutting-edge cybersecurity education. And cybersecurity is not just a field, it's something that you really need to build into everything. It's a mission for us. As a National Center of Academic Excellence in Cyber Defense Education, designated by both the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the NSA, we're really committed to advancing knowledge and innovation in the space through our Center for Cybersecurity and Forensics Education, C2SAFE. We've really revamped our cybersecurity degree. So we used to have a bunch of cybersecurity degrees across campus, but now we've focused it, having a single degree with various specializations of things like manufacturing, technology, law and policy, among others, with a common core to make sure that every cybersecurity graduate that we have has experience in all these areas, has some knowledge in all these areas. Next spring, we plan to roll out a master's degree online so that we can reach people where they are. So if you're interested in just kind of upskilling, it's a good option to do that without having to come down to our wonderful campus. And get a chance to take your knowledge and credentials to the next level. So watch for more details on that. So whether you're a student, a company seeking top cybersecurity talent, a young professional looking to upskill, or perhaps a more seasoned professional who's interested in sharing your knowledge and experience with the next generation, reach out to us. I think you'll find a greater collection of students and faculty and in cybersecurity, in the area. So once again, I'd really like to thank you for joining us. We've got an incredible set of speakers coming through and panelists, and it should just be an amazing meeting today. So enjoy the conference. Really make sure you have great discussions. This is really a time for networking, to meeting each other, and hopefully connections you make will last you for years to come. And really, let's just collaborate together and enjoy the day. So welcome to Illinois Tech, and I hope you enjoy the conference.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Horba. I'm President and CEO of InfraShield, and it's my great honor today to introduce Jake Braun. He is Executive Director of the Harris School of Public Policy Cyber Policy Initiative. Mr. Braun previously served as Acting Principal Deputy National Cyber Director in the White House from May 2023 to July 2024. Prior to that, he was the Senior Counselor for Transformation to the Secretary of Homeland Security. Mr. Braun was initially appointed by President Biden as Senior Advisor to the Department of Homeland Security's Management Directorate in February of 2021. He is also a lecturer at the Harris School of Public Policy. Mr. Braun is the author of Democracy in Danger: How Hackers and Activists Exposed Fatal Flaws in the Election System, and has co-authored 3 award-winning and seminal works on election infrastructure, cyber vulnerabilities. He has worked extensively on national security and finance issues throughout the U.S., Europe, Asia, Africa, Middle East, and Latin America. Mr. Braun was Chief Executive Officer of Cambridge Global Advisors from 2013 to 2021. He assisted clients in the management, development, and implementation of their national security programs, practices, and policies. Prior to joining the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy faculty and Cambridge Global Advisors, Mr. Braun was appointed by President Barack Obama as Director of White House and Public Liaison to the Department of Homeland Security, where he oversaw some of the most high-profile public engagements executed at DHS. He was instrumental in the effort to gain passage in the European Parliament of the largest data sharing agreement between the United States and the European Union. In addition, he designed and implemented a program to modernize the DHS cybersecurity workforce. Mr. Braun also oversaw stakeholder crisis communications for the White House during the 2010 Deepwater Horizon Gulf oil spill. Before his tenure as White House liaison, Mr. Braun served on the presidential transition team for the Obama administration as Deputy Director for the National Security Agency's review. In this capacity, he oversaw agency review programs for all of the national security agencies, including the State Department, DOD, DHS, CIA, USAID, and et cetera. Mr. Braun is co-founder of the DEF CON Voting Machine Hacking Village, which I've personally been to many times, and in the President's Circle on the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Mr. Braun began his career as a journalist for newspapers in Illinois and Taiwan. He holds an MA in International Relationships from Troy St. Louis University, also an MA in Education from National Louis University in Chicago, and a bachelor's in philosophy from University of Chicago. I'd like to everybody give a round of hand, and please thank him for coming.
Hi, how's it going? Good morning. Thanks for making it here on a wet, what is today, Wednesday? Wednesday morning. And I want to thank the folks for having the event today. Looks like a good event. I saw a lot of people milling about this morning, so it seems like the networking goal, at least, is so far achieved, or started to be achieved. When I talk to the folks here about what I should talk to you all about, they asked me to go through the kind of development of the national cyber strategy, how we got there, and where we think it's going. I know since this is law school, I was going to talk a little bit about a few of the pieces of the national cyber strategy that directly relate to some legal issues, and then also talk about how things have changed. Obviously, the last 3 months have seen lots of change. That being said, the national cyber strategy is actually still in place. It's one of the things that hasn't been replaced with something else yet, and even cyber executive order that we put out about 3 days before the inauguration of President Trump is actually still standing as well. It's one of the only executive orders that the new administration kept in place. And so much of what was put in place a few years ago is actually still in place now, and I'll kind of talk a little bit about how that came to be, and then what changes we might see in the future with the new administration and so on. So first off, the National Cyber Strategy was written by a completely new office in the White House called the Office of the National Cyber Director. That office was created by a bipartisan act of Congress during the first Trump administration in 2019, and it was set up essentially because cyber, from a policymaking perspective, not to mention operationally, was very fragmented across the federal government. I think that when part of DHS became CISA, became its own kind of component, a lot of folks thought, well, that'll be able to coordinate cyber policy writ large, but of course CISA doesn't deal with what the intel community does or what the Defense Department does and so on and so forth. It's really more just, kind of civilian cyber defense. And so that kind of didn't really scratch the itch for leadership in Washington and nationally or globally for that matter. And so finally, after a lot of deliberation, the Senate set up a big committee. That committee, the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, I guess it was a commission, not a committee, Cyberspace Solarium Commission, came up with a bunch of recommendations, one of which was to create this new office in the White House. As you can imagine, it's not often that new offices in the White House were created. I think aside from the pandemic office created after COVID, this was one of the only new offices to be created in the White House in the last 50 years. And so while it was created in the first Trump administration, since it was the very end, we didn't hire our first employees until the Biden administration. And we actually went from our first employee in the fall of 21 to nearly 100 by the time I left in the end of 2024. And so it scaled up to be actually quite a large office in the White House as well. And one of the questions about setting up a new office like this is, Congress gives you a statute and gives you certain authorities and so on and so forth, but then what you do is really directed by the president and the executive branch, not Congress or the judiciary. And so the office kind of milled about for a while, and eventually the president directed the National Security Advisor to direct the National Cyber Director, who at the time was Chris Inglis, to write the national cyber strategy for the U.S. government and, generally speaking, the United States. That national cyber strategy was actually the fourth iteration of a national cyber strategy. The first one was written by the Bush administration. Obama did their own update. Trump did his own variation, but essentially an update of it. And then Biden wrote, but the Biden administration wrote the fourth one. So the National Security Advisor to the President directs the National Cyber Director, okay, we need you to write a new national cyber strategy. And so unlike previous go-arounds where there was kind of one person at the National Security Council and maybe a few junior staff and a contractor or two who kind of write this whole thing, the National Cyber Director now had a whole staff and so on to be able to really dig into this. And I think it's very much reflected in this document that there was a lot more expertise and capacity and so on put into writing this document. And one of the things they did is really kind of try and rethink how are we going to approach cybersecurity in the future? Because what we've been doing, you know, I think it's hard. I don't think it's deniable that it's harder for your average bad guy to get into a network than it was 40 years ago or 30 years ago. But that being said, the outcomes are still relatively the same. The bad guys still get in, particularly if they want to get in, and certainly if they're a nation state, they definitely can get in if they want to. And so in the course of writing the National Cyber Strategy, we really tried to rethink, okay, what is it we're talking about? Like, what would actually change dynamics in terms of actually making us more secure as a society, government, et cetera. And so the strategy really called for two major shifts in how we think about cyber strategy. There were dozens and dozens of other recommendations, and I'll talk about a few later, but there was two key major shifts. One was to shift the burden for cyber security from the individual to the big corporations that build our tech and actually have the resources to do cybersecurity. So think, you know, I have 14-year-old twins and I have an 85-year-old father. And not to be ageist, but it should not be incumbent upon my 14-year-old twins who spout off mis and disinformation they read, or sorry, they don't read it, they watch it on line every day. It shouldn't be incumbent upon them or my wonderful father, who's a very smart guy, but also technology is not his strong suit, who is, you know, has scammers after him every single day because he's a senior citizen. It shouldn't be incumbent upon them to make sure that they don't click the wrong thing and then all of a sudden their bank account is drained, or in the case of my children, my bank account is drained. And so one of the key things we call for in the strategy is that the big companies that are making billions and billions and billions of dollars off of all of us buying and using their tech and have the resources and know-how to be able to make their technology cyber secure, the onus should be on them to do that, not just on the individuals. So that's thing one. Thing two, as I'm sure is near and dear to the hearts of many people in this room who work in this field, we called for incentivizing investments in cybersecurity on the front end of projects, as opposed to what we've been doing for the last 40 years, which is bolting cyber on after the fact. And so think about critical infrastructure. For example, you know, we built our modern electric infrastructure across the country over the last, I forget when Edison made the light bulb, I think the late 1800s. So the last, you know, 100 plus years, we've been building our election infrastructure, or our electric infrastructure across the country. But really, it's only been about the last 15 or so years that we've been making any of that electric infrastructure cyber secure. I remember early days in the Obama administration talking to a friend of mine about the smart grid. And so this was fewer than 15 years ago. And I was at Homeland Security as the White House liaison there and said, hey, so in all these smart grid conversations that you guys at the Department of Energy and elsewhere are having, how much do you talk about cyber, making sure that this smart grid is going to be cyber secure? And he was like, it hasn't come up in one conversation ever. And we literally meet on this 5 times a day, 5 days a week. But I mean, that was 2009 and 10. And like, you know, it just, cyber wasn't at the forefront of people's minds in other industries outside of cyber the way it is today. So we've been bolting cybersecurity onto the electric grid and everything for the last 15, 20 years. And you can say that for so many other industries. And that's not a strategy for success, as they would say. And so what we called for is incentivizing. How can we as a federal government incentivize long-term investments in cybersecurity on the front end of our infrastructure projects and others, as opposed to bolting it on after the fact. And so the National Cyber Strategy, really everything in it, all the dozens and dozens of recommendations, somehow tie back to those two key shifts that we call for in the strategy. However, as many people would like to say, strategies are nice. Strategies from Washington in particular can be nice or really annoying if they don't come with any resources, and unfunded mandates are not usually very welcome. And so one of the things we immediately did as we started putting together the strategy was say, okay, how is all this going to get paid for? In particular, if we're saying that we want to incentivize long-term investments in cybersecurity, where are these investments going to come from? And so fortunately, because we had this new office in the White House that Congress created and appropriated some funds for, we had some money for budget staff. And that wasn't staff to look at our measly little White House budget. It was staff to look at the rest of the federal government's budget and understand where the cyber spend was and what it could be used for. And what we initially started looking into was the funds coming out of two key bills. One was BIL, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which, as it says in the title, is bipartisan. It was passed to invest in our infrastructure across the country. So think, there's a new wing being built on O'Hare. A lot of that's this BIL is the acronym, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. That's BIL money. There's a new bus system being put into South Bend, Indiana. That's BIL money. There's massive investments into the electric grid and so on. That's BIL money. So think bricks and mortar. It's like building stuff, right, is BIL. Then the CHIPS and Science Act, which I assume the people in this room are far more familiar with, really goes into things like onshoring our chips production and so on and so forth. Those two bills, as well as a few others, make up about $2 trillion in investment. By the way, BIL and CHIPS, for now at least, have been kept around by the new administration, so those investments persist. Those investments, along with a couple others, make up about $2 trillion of investment in the future of America. And while cyber isn't mentioned very many times in any of those bills, it is kind of implicit and through all of the investments that those bills fund. So, for example, you can't, or certainly shouldn't, build a wing on a modern airport without building cyber into that wing of the airport. You can't and shouldn't build a new modern bus system like the one in South Bend without making sure that there's cyber built in on the front end of that. And similarly with the massive investments in the grid and so on and so forth, those aren't done in today's age without cyber being a part of that. One of the things, though, that my office did was to go through these bills line by line by line and find where cyber wasn't allowable or in most cases an expected expense. So, hey, city of Kalamazoo, Michigan, you want to build a new bridge? Great. Here's some money from BIL to do it. Usually they have matching funds and so on they have to come up with. And by the way, as a requirement, you have to make sure cyber is a part of that this new bridge is cyber secure. And so we went through that for hundreds and thousands of projects that were being implemented across the country and went to governor's offices who oftentimes managed the money as it came from the federal government or private sector entities that were building the new chips fabs and so on, or laying broadband and stuff like that, which is a lot of this money went into and so on, to say, okay, what's your cyber plan? And we actually put together cybersecurity plans for these folks to make sure that they were using the investments to make sure that we were using the investments to ensure that these projects were cyber secure by design and not bolted on after the fact. Again, responding to the second part of the National Cyber Strategy, which is incentivizing long-term investment in cyber. So, having a strategy is nice. Strategies without resources are less nice. And so going through the nearly $2 trillion of investment that was put forth by Congress, by multiple bipartisan bills, and identifying all the cyber spend in those bills and all the money that could be spent on this new infrastructure, or on cyber in this new infrastructure, was a key thing we focused on because strategies are not so nice if they don't have resources behind them. And what we found over time was actually quite encouraging. While cyber wasn't called out often, as I mentioned, the implicit spend, the spend that O'Hare is going to put into the airport, that the bus system in Indiana or in South Bend is going to put into the bus system and so on, represents, we believe, the largest investment in cybersecurity in history. because even a small amount of $2 trillion is still a heck of a lot of money. And cyber, while we all view it as really expensive, is not as expensive as building massive bridges and airports and so on and so forth. And so added together, all the pieces of those bills that go to fund all this infrastructure and the new chip fabs and everything else make up the largest investment in cybersecurity in history. The thing is, as I'm telling by the look on many people's faces, most people don't know about all these resources going to these investments. And a lot of the problem with that, or one of the reasons is that a lot of the folks who make a chip fab or make an airport or build a bus system aren't cyber people. And one of the things that my office used to do, and I think they will do once their new director is confirmed, is go around the country and tell folks like yourselves and other folks in cyber, like, hey, all these investments are coming or are already happening. You all should be reaching out to those who are implementing these investments in your communities, like the new wing of O'Hare and so on, and saying, hey, how can we be a part of this project? How can we help be the ones to make sure that it's built in a cyber secure way? So thing one, write a strategy. Thing two, make sure there's money to implement the strategy. However, thing three is, as we like to say, it's great to have a strategy. It's great to have a strategy with resources. But if you don't have people to actually implement the strategy and use the resources, well then neither the strategy nor the resources went to any good. And so we, of course, are facing the same thing all of you are every day, which is the massive shortage of cyber professionals to fill all these open cyber jobs across the country, both in government, the private sector, and so on. And so one of the things that we then immediately tackled after we wrote the strategy and started our budget process to find resources to fund the strategy was to put together a national cyber workforce strategy. That strategy also had two key shifts. And we've seen actually the federal government and many corporations start to move in the direction of the two key shifts we call for in the national cyber workforce strategy. Number one is to hire based on skills, not four-year degrees. Now look, I teach at a four-year degree granting institution. I realize I'm standing here at a four-year degree granting institution, or at least I guess a law school, which presumably you had to have a four-year degree to get into in the first place. So it's not like we're against four-year degrees. However, we did the math and figured out that even if everybody in a four-year degree program in cyber in the country stayed in that program, graduated from that program, and then went into the field of cyber, we still wouldn't have enough people to fill all the jobs. And as we all know, none of those first three things happen, right? Like people change majors, people don't graduate, and people go into fields they didn't get a degree in the first place. And so we're kind of woefully unprepared to fill all these massive cyber vacancies. 500,000 vacancies across the country was the last count I saw. If we're just targeting people who get four-year degrees. And so we called for hiring people based on skills. And in fact, we changed billions of dollars in federal contracts to remove four-year degree requirements where they weren't necessary, because if you're a junior SOC analyst or somebody who's just helping maintain firewalls on a network, you probably don't need a four-year degree. You could probably take a 6-month course at a community college, maybe a SANS course for a long weekend, or any number of other things, and be qualified to be a junior SOC analyst or maintain some firewalls. And so from our perspective, once you remove the four-year degree requirement, for jobs that you don't need them. And by the way, we still need people with four-year degrees. We still need people with masters in cyber, and we still need PhDs in cyber. So none of that goes away, but now you've kind of opened up the aperture to bring in more people. But once you remove the four-year degree, then that enables you to do what we need to do to fill all these jobs, which is dramatically open the aperture and expand the pipeline of people who can enter the field. Because one of the problems with only bringing in people with four-year degrees is that you've selected, by definition, people who at the ripe old age of 18 self-selected into the field of cyber. Well, there's a lot of people who may want to work in cyber but didn't realize they wanted to work in cyber until they were 25 or 35 or 45 or 55. And one of my favorite examples is, I think it was SANS, or maybe it was a DEF CON program, where Target brought some group in to assess their cyber work, or to assess their entire workforce, to look for people who might have an aptitude for cyber. And they found a guy at some Target, and I don't know where, who was literally the guy who goes around the parking lot and gets all the carts and puts them in, the line that the carts go in, which I don't want to disparage. It's a very important job. I am often like trying to drive around these carts, and so I very much appreciate the guy who grabs the carts and puts them where they're supposed to go. So not to diminish his job, but turns out this guy was this cyber wizard that no one, I don't even think he knew he was a cyber wizard, but because when he wasn't at Target, he was spending the rest of his life online playing video games and learning how to hack things, and turns out he's this brilliant autodidactic learner, never got a 4-year degree, and once Target found this guy, he wound up serving in very senior positions, and turned out that he was one of their best cyber professionals in the organization. But until they got the mindset of, you don't need a 4-year degree for a bunch of these jobs, and once again you remove that barrier in your brain, that they were able to then really open up the aperture and find other folks who are quite qualified. So again, what that enables us to do is start targeting different groups who aren't in cyber, or aren't as well represented in cyber today. So as I can tell by, there's no shortage of gray hair, or maybe no hair in some cases in this room. So many of you remember back in the early days of cyber when basically everybody in cyber looked just like me. Those days, things have gotten better. They're not perfect, but they've gotten better. But once you can open up the aperture, that really enables you to start targeting women in tech groups, diversity organizations, or diverse organizations that represent different racial and ethnic groups that are dramatically underrepresented in cyber, and to bring them into this field where we desperately need them. As one anecdote of the fact that I know that this approach can work is, at Homeland Security years ago, we got religion on this early because we had such a tough time hiring. And so we started an internship program. And one of the things we wanted to do was to try and get as many people as we could into the program. And so we reached out to all different groups, even like Native American organizations, obviously women in tech, African Americans in tech, Latinos in tech, every group you can think of, we were reaching out to these groups to try and get them to apply. And it turns out that not just our application rates, but even our hiring rates dramatically went up to the point where we were almost in concert with the population overall. So like, I think 1% of our hirees wound up being Native American, which are about 1% of the overall US population. I think our African American numbers were even higher, where we had, I think African Americans make up about 11% or 13% of the population. Our numbers were upwards of 20%, and so on and so forth. And how did we get to those numbers? You're going to be shocked to hear. We reached out to the groups that these different communities engage in, whether they be community college, trade associations, affinity groups, whatever, and said, hey, apply for this internship. So that radical thinking of actually reaching out to different groups you want to apply for the jobs and ask them to apply for them actually turned out to work the way it was intended, and got people to apply for the jobs, and dramatically increased not just the number of people who applied, but the quality of the folks that applied, and obviously enabled us to ensure that our workforce mirrored the population at large, not because we thought it was like an important moral thing to do, but because we desperately needed good people in cyber to defend our national security, which was Homeland Security's job. Okay, so having a strategy is nice, but strategy without resources is a bad thing. So next, we found the resources, right? Had our budget people look for the money. And then third, strategies are nice. Strategies with resources are great, but strategies without people don't go anywhere because you don't have anybody to implement the strategy. And so we put together the cyber workforce strategy and released that. And like I said, we've seen significant uptake of these programs. There's departments of transportation, for example, across the United States are now using checklists and so on that we worked with CISA and NIST to put together to ensure that as all these transportation program or investments are made, they're now using these checklists to make sure they're cyber secure. Those programs are funded by BIL money, so they're leveraging the resources we talked about, and we've seen federal contracts and also big corporations who are a little bit more cyber mature have started to remove these 4-year degree requirements for jobs where they don't need them. Of course, in many jobs you still need a 4-year degree or should have a 4-year degree, but we've been able to remove those and so on. And so we've seen these decisions start to really have an impact on the industry. Let me just jump to changes because I know we want to get to questions and we're done at 10, right? Yeah, I think so. Okay. All right, your time. Good. Okay, great. So that's all great. Like I said, the strategy's still in place for now. I'm sure the new administration will write an updated version like others have in the past. But what will likely be different? So let me start with AI. So it's interesting. I don't know, the new administration will either be the best thing that ever happened to the development of AI, or I don't know about the opposite of it, but or not that. And I'll tell you why. So the Biden administration was very concerned about kind of AI going off the rails, and so most of the Biden administration's kind of thinking on this and the executive orders and so on they put out were really about the idea of trustworthy and secure AI. How do we trust the data that goes in? How do we trust the answers that we get back out? How do we make sure that AI isn't racist? How do we make sure that AI doesn't tell us to do a whole bunch of things that were like the wrong answers, and then we all go off and think we're curing cancer when in fact we're not, and stuff like that. The Trump administration, and the reason for that was there's a big concern that, well, once we get to general artificial intelligence and super intelligence and all these things that supposedly are right around the corner if you talk to the folks in AI, if AI doesn't have the right guardrails on it, things could go very horribly bad, particularly once AI gets as smart or smarter than we are in certain respects. I don't know if we'll ever be fully smarter than we are, but things could get very bad very quick if we don't have the right guardrails in place. The Trump administration has said, we don't really care about that. We, the Trump administration, thinks that the main threat that we need to worry about is China beating us in AI. And kind of damn the consequences of removing some of the guardrails and so on. We want innovation, we want it fast, and we want to be able to beat China. And you know what? I don't know if they're wrong. Having an authoritarian dictatorship, the size and scale of China with the military it has and its intent maybe as early as 2027 to invade Taiwan, based on, those are their words, not ours. I don't think I want them having super intelligent AI, and I certainly want ours to be better than theirs. And so this is where I think there's really, we're going to see how this plays out. The Trump folks really, they got rid of the Biden executive orders that called for this trustworthy and secure AI and so on. They've doubled down on facilitating and promoting innovation in AI with the goal of beating China. And like I said, none of us have any idea kind of how this is going to play out. I don't know that they're wrong, but I know that it is definitely a shift from where we were 3 months ago. And both downsides are really bad. Super intelligent AI going off the rails is a really bad thing. China, in my view, getting better AI than we have is, in particular its military having it, is a really bad thing. So, like I said, I am very up in the air on whether the Trump administration is going to be the best thing ever for AI because we'll stay ahead of China, or the worst thing ever because they said, damn the guardrails. Okay, so that's, I think, one big change we're going to see. Two, I think that speaking of China, the focus away from Russia and onto China, I think it will have a couple big impacts. One, so you've seen the potential ban of TikTok. I think you're going to see more things like that happen. Again, I know there's people talk about TikTok in terms of mis and disinformation, which I think is a far lesser problem than the fact that 170 million Americans have Chinese spyware now downloaded onto their phones that basically just goes right back into the Chinese Communist Party intelligence operation. That is a problem. And so I think we're seeing moves by the Trump administration to really be tough on groups like Huawei, ZTE, now TikTok, et cetera. So we'll see more of that, I think. But with the kind of pulling back from China, as we know, or from Russia, as we know, most ransomware emanates from Russia or Russian-affiliated countries. And so, there is a big question mark or concern in my mind as to whether we see the already rampant ransomware attacks on our critical infrastructure companies and so on get worse because we've taken our focus off of Russia and really kind of more myopically focused on China. And so I think you're going to see shifts there as well. So I know we started a couple minutes late and we do want questions, so I will pause there and happy to take questions.
Jay,
Sure.
Can I build on your workforce development?
Of course.
We should also consider converting some of the existing IT staff, like a system administrator or an administrator, if they have the inclination to transfer to that profession. So we should tap into that. Secondly, there are school teachers, stockbrokers who want to change a career, go get a 2-year certificate, also be able to build a pipeline. But a major issue that's clogging everything is faculty, the need for faculty. And I think that's something that we should also be concerned about.
No, that's a great point. We actually went to ensure that there was a good amount of money at the National Science Foundation, and I think Department of Labor too, I forget where else we moved money into, to recruit and train more teachers in cyber. With the recent cuts and suspensions of contracts and grants and so on, I don't know where that stands, but there was a lot of resources being put into that exact issue. So I agree, it's a huge problem and one of the main limiting factors for us, for sure. Sir, can you say where you're from? Actually, where were you from, sir? I should have asked you.
Former CIO for the state of Wisconsin.
Okay, great.
Gcsi, Executive Security Advisors, former cyber operations officer for the U.S. Army.
Great. Thank you for your service.
One of the things that we see at the macro level, you've covered all the points. I've read the document you said, love the work that ONT is doing, has done. And the execution part is where I see some of the challenges, where the SMBs are excluded out of the infrastructure bill and getting those cyber because it's difficult to break that barrier. So all of that you said, plus getting the access. And the second part on the workforce development, if you want a job with the government, you have to game the system. So everything you're saying is correct. I sat with the CEOs for all the services a couple of weeks ago with the cyber workforce initiative. They're still talking about a lot of what you're saying. The skills are important versus the experience and the education. Skills is what's based on that. But if you want to get hired with I guess what used to be, maybe still is, the largest employer in the nation, the U.S. government, you have to game the system and basically lie on your application and say you're fully qualified for this job that no one is qualified for. How do you reconcile the macro with the micro on these things where I believe what your team did phenomenal, but at the execution level,
I know, it's so frustrating. It's like there's a story I like to point to essentially make your point, which is at Homeland Security back in 2010 or 11, we begged Congress to give us a hiring authority so that we could hire kind of whoever we wanted as long as they were qualified based on how we deemed their qualifications, not some weird OPM rule, and pay market rates and so on. And this great new authority Congress gave us to speed up hiring and everything else, once it was handed over to the HR people, It took them 7 years to write the rules around this, which actually handcuffed us probably more than we were before the bill was passed. So this is a reality in large organizations is, the senior leaders may have a good idea and they get all the stakeholders together and it's like, okay, here's what we're going to do. And then when it gets down to execution, it kind of falls apart. I think that over time, necessity will force them to start to deal with this because the people who have to do the work are eventually going to say to the hiring managers, look, I don't care what your problems are. This is what the policy is, so just do it. But it's going to take, these aren't things that get solved in 6 months. It'll be years before it's trickled down all the way through the hiring managers. I mean, if that's how it is at the services, imagine what it's like at HUD, So, yeah, fair point. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so, quite a bit of talk is usually about China and Russia, but specifically, what's your thoughts? I'm a little concerned that we're a little bit dismissive about North Korea. While militarily, I think we have that covered, I'm not so sure when it comes to cyber. I think they upped that quite a bit. I just want to know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, well, and I forget from my high school civics whether this is exactly the right term, but they've become essentially a kleptocracy in the sense that, they are, one of their main sources of revenue is just stealing money from other people, or like the national government's main sources of revenue is just stealing money, which is largely done, or often done via cyber attack. I think that they're a huge, to your point, militarily, we're worried about them doing something stupid, like shooting a missile at California or something, which would then potentially start World War III. From a military perspective, otherwise, think about Sony and so on. The main threat from them, I think, is on the private sector and so on, because they do, as a course of business, just steal money via ransomware and a whole host of other things. Yeah, you're right. They have been deprioritized after the invasion of Ukraine, and particularly China making the 2027 comment about going into Taiwan. But North Korea's attacks have not decreased, and so maybe with the renewed focus on China in the Trump administration, you'll see an increase of focus on North Korea, but that remains to be seen. They are certainly about backwater in terms of the geostrategic thinking right now. Mm-hmm. Sir.
Steve Weber, I'm an executive consultant with the Carillion Consulting Group. Actually, we talked this morning.
Of course.
Just one comment, one question. In cybersecurity, having a strategy without resources is unheard of. I think that's the first time I've heard it.
Well, I think the point is that the federal government comes up with strategies without resources and a whole host of industries all the time. But the good idea fairy, yeah.
The question is, when you were looking at the DIL and the other
Chips, yeah.
chips, what was some of the criteria you and the team looked at to kind of forecast resources and prioritization of which projects should we look at first? Is that something you can share?
Yeah. So we were able, and you can go, you used to be able to, I don't know if it's still there, on the White House website, track where all the investments are. And so literally, you would think, that things are more coordinated than they are. But honestly, our team was often going on our public website to find where awards had been made for grants and contracts and so on, and then going to the relevant party, whether it be the governor of that state or key industry players or whatever, and saying, hey, are you guys doing cyber in that? And then after we kind of did somewhat of a whack-a-mole for a while, we were able to pull back a little bit and get somewhat more strategic and say, okay, so who's kind of the worse off? And so you look at the defense industrial base, they're pretty good, and they have plenty of resources to do their own security. Same with the finance industry. Energy's come along a lot in the last 10, 15 years, but places like water, the water industry, transportation industry, they're way behind. agriculture too, way, way behind. And so we started to really focus on industries where big resources were going to that were the least cyber mature, and then that's how we would target. Mhm.
By the way, you have an extra 5 minutes.
I thought you were the timekeeper. I see, wonderful. Anybody else? Yes, sir, in the back.
Hi, my name is George Lloyd, former Department of Commerce. I did manage to gain the system and got here at the Department of Commerce. My question for you is on the aspect of global workforce development, including the United States. The United States has been benefit from a lot of international students who comes in, study here, including the technical course, and become American citizens. They get hired, some of them even get into the U.S. government. So you have all that skill set from around the world to build, in this case, cybersecurity defense. But what's happening is that with the elimination of DEI, reduction of the ability for international to stay in the United States, isn't the workforce going to be down to just American, what they call true Americans only? So reducing the workforce. I don't know what your thoughts on that.
So one of the good things about cyber is it traditionally hasn't been as partisan of an issue as many others. Immigration, on the other hand, is not that. I think your question is somewhat leading in the sense of like, gee, with all these changes, isn't that going to hurt our ability to recruit and retain the best and brightest from abroad? And without getting too political, I would say yes, that is going to hurt our ability to recruit and retain the best and brightest from abroad. Yes.
With your educational background, you're more important than a student. The question I have is the slash burning that's going on with the federal courts right now. I've got to imagine that these students now probably aren't looking for the government looking at job stability that they used to enjoy. How long of a tail is that going to be before it becomes desirable for the federal government?
No, it's a great question. And like this problem existed even before this. I can't imagine the last 3 months have made it any better. In fact, at CISA, we had this hiring authority where we were able to bring people in. It was kind of relevant or related to the thing I was talking about a minute ago, where we could pay an industry rate and bring people in based on aptitude and so on. They got rid of all of those people, hundreds of them, because they were hired via some authority that they didn't like. And so, as you can imagine, that would have a serious chilling effect. When you have some of the best experts at CISA being tossed out, why would new people apply? I think that there's a real interest from young people to go into the federal government. Part of the problem, though, is that they kind of see the dysfunction in Washington and hear stories about, and I don't mean just now dysfunction, like dysfunction forever in Washington. And it really does hurt with recruiting. I think where agencies seem to win and do really well and not have as much of a problem recruiting, it's when they can recruit on mission, and so on their mission. So like the CIA, for example, they don't have a problem recruiting because like everybody wants to work at the CIA. It's super cool, you know. Same like NSA has, you know, hundreds and hundreds of resumes for every job. Now, granted, I presume like 90% of them are like Russian or Chinese spies trying to get in, but nonetheless, they. Oh, right, because everybody's in a hiring freeze, but that'll change soon, hopefully. Who really has a problem is places like, who I like to pick on, HUD or Department of Interior. You know, if you're a great cyber expert, like why would you ever go work there? And the federal government needs to do a serious branding, or at least the agencies themselves need to do some serious branding work to recruit people. Because it's interesting, I mean, I don't know what Bruce thinks at the city, but at least our students are really interested in going into state and local government. That seems to still hold an appeal for them in terms of being able to like have impact and all that type of stuff that young people talk about all the time. and have meaning and so on. But for some reason, a lot of the federal jobs have lost that for folks. And until there's, a serious rebranding for a lot of these agencies with young people, those problems will persist. Thanks. I think time for one more. Yes, sir.
With our government's current administration's relationship with government, that seems to a lot of people appear kind of cozy, what do you think is the chance that we're ever really going to go after one of our biggest issues, which is, as you mentioned, the ransomware coming to play with Russia and its built inroads?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you would think that could be a benefit of coming out of a potential drawdown in Ukraine would be to say to Russia, hey, Putin, we know you can stop all this. Because, of course, he can just round people up and throw them in prison or, slit their throats if he wants to, and does all the time. We'll do this, but one of the contingencies we want is you need to stop all this ransomware that's targeting us, target somebody else or whatever. Like a deal like that in theory could be cut. I don't have any sense that that's actually what's being pursued, but it could be. And to where I think you're going, I do view removing our focus from Russia and putting it elsewhere could enable a serious increase in ransomware. I mean, one of the things that, with as bad as ransomware is, I think it could have been much worse. We were putting a ton of pressure on Russia to say, look, if this stuff targets certain industries, like hospitals, for example, we're holding you, Putin, accountable personally for that. I forget if the president said that directly to him or if the ambassador did. I don't remember. But there was direct conversations with Putin and his senior-most leadership about targeting certain things, which they generally held off on. Whether that's going to continue or not, I don't know. Okay, I think that's good on time. Okay, thank you so much.
I'd like to give you a book by our friend Todd. He wrote a book.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Wonderful. Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Okay, Tyler, so you can come and take care of that stuff. Right? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, come on. So you can take.
Good morning, everyone. What a great way to kick off today. Thank you again. So another round of applause for him. It's fantastic. Thank you, Jake. So, thank you. My name is Tyler Forbes, and I am thrilled to help us kick off what's going to be and has already started very much to be a fantastic day of learning, connection, and conversation. We have an incredible lineup of speakers and panels ahead, and we will be covering everything from executive-level cybersecurity strategy to real-world insights from the field. So again, thank you all for being here. It's going to be a full and engaging day. I think before we jump in, a few quick sort of housekeeping things. Maybe we've already heard, but in case you're having issues with the Wi-Fi, the username is GCIS 2025. And the passwords are on your badge, so please have a look for that if you haven't already. The restrooms, obviously, are just outside if you're needing to use that. Also, please silence your cell phones. We haven't had any issues with that so far, but just in case, wanted to make sure we can give the speakers our full attention throughout the day, so we don't want any distractions from cell phones. And if you do need to take a call, we kindly ask that you step out into the hallway to avoid any disruptions. So with that being said, did Gcsi leave? He is quick. I don't know where he got off to, but we'll find him later. With that being said, I actually will go ahead and invite Bruce Coughing up. He is an information security professional with over 25 years of industry experience in information technology and cybersecurity. He is currently the CISO for the City of Chicago. And prior to joining the City of Chicago, Mr. Coughing held the Senior Vice President Information Security position at Bank of America, and was a senior manager at consulting firm Accenture. So without further ado, please help me in welcoming Mr. Coughing up to the stage. And I will let you introduce your panel and additional speakers.
All right. Good morning, and welcome to the 2025 edition of the Global Cybersecurity Initiative's annual conference. After a fantastic talk by Jake Braun, we've reached our first panel discussion for today. This
Test.
Is that better? Here we go. This panel is focused on connecting the dots between cyber and enterprise risk. For the discussion, we brought together insights from the CISO suite, the governance risk and compliance team, the academic and legal fields. I have the privilege of moderating our panel this morning. As introduced, my name is Bruce Coffey, and I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the City of Chicago. And I've spent the last 6.5 years leading a team of cyber professionals protecting City of Chicago assets ranging from our airports to our water filtration plants, one of which is the world's largest surface water filtration plant. We are #hiring. If you're in the market, please see my numerous posts on LinkedIn for more information. So let's introduce our panelists. Let's start with Stella Danza.
Yeah, good day, everyone. Can you hear me? Awesome. My name is Stella Danzo. I've built my career at the intersection of technology, security, privacy, and strategy. And I've done this across several industries, including CPG, retail, investments, insurance, telecommunications, and most recently, e-commerce. I have worked for quite a few iconic brands. I've been very fortunate, including Optus Communications and Siemens in Australia. So if you're wondering where the accent is from, it starts from there. And in the US, 3Com, to age myself, Allstate, Kellogg's, McDonald's, and most recently at Expedia Group. And at Expedia Group, I acted as the Senior Director for Security, Compliance, Risk Governance, and Privacy. And I reported and acted as a key advisor to our CIO and CISO, and worked with the C-suite and leadership on how to make risk-informed decisions and do that in a way that transformed the organization from a risk culture standpoint while driving practical risk reductions, as well as optimizing cost and enabling growth in a data-driven world while forging digital trust. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you. We'll hand it off to Fred.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Fred Kwong. I'm the VP and CISO over at DeVry University. I'm here because Gcsi needed to fill an Asian quota, and so that's why I'm here. Outside of that, I've been in information technology security in 20 plus years. I've pretty much worked all the verticals, healthcare, financial, insurance, manufacturing, education. I don't know, there's probably some other ones I missed there along the way, but worked in large and small organizations from 50 people to 180,000 people. So I don't know, that's me in a nutshell. I'm not that interesting.
All right, thanks, Fred. We'll hand it off to Ray.
Hi, Ray Trigstad. In 1987, Congress passed the Computer Security Act. And in 1988, as a young lieutenant commander in the Navy, they pointed at me and said, "You are now the Information Systems Security Officer." And I said, "Aye, aye, sir," as we do in the Navy. And that's how I got into cybersecurity. Since that time, I have been, I retired from the Navy at Illinois Tech, where I am now a faculty member. I started as a faculty member teaching Navy ROTC, retired. I've been the IT director for the Rice campus in Wheaton and the IT director for the School of Applied Technology, while also becoming a faculty member, and our accreditation people made me stop being the IT director because they said I had too many jobs. So I have taught cybersecurity and information technology and It's a great field, and one of the things that I'm very proud of is the fact that I have many, many students who've gone on to be incredibly successful in the field. I'm a teaching professor, not a research faculty member, and of course research faculty members measure their success by how many citations they have. We measure our success as teaching faculty by how successful our students are. And I can say with pride that my students are enormously successful and are contributing enormously to the cybersecurity sphere here in the Chicago area. So I'm happy to be here today.
I'm Richard Warner. I'm a professor here at Chicago Kent, and my distinguished panelists have far more practical experience I do. I'm the academic theoretical side. I just finished a review of the case law in cybersecurity, which is one of my specialties, in a book we just published for Aspen teaching law students. So I will provide some academic counterpoint to the very practical discussion.
But legal counterpoint too, which is pretty important.
Yeah, legal counterpoint. I hope it's legal.
I hope so.
All right, fantastic. So our first question of the morning for our panelists is, how are you seeing organizations measuring cybersecurity risk? I'm being careful not to step on the third rail issue of risk quantification versus heat maps. Stella, let's start with you.
I'm going to step on that.
All right, let's do it.
So at the end of the day, no matter what size, industry, or location, every business looks to achieve some key outcomes when it comes to risk management. And so out of the gate, it's about driving better performance for the organization. It's also about ensuring resiliency for the organization and making sure that there is greater assurance and cost-effective compliance. And so the way that you measure your risk has to be in a language that is common and similar to the way you measure value at the end of the day, right? So the value, if it's a value for your shareholders, if it's a value for your employees, your partners, and the communities that you work and serve in, your risk conversation and the risk that you take has to be in proportion to the performance and outcomes that you want to achieve based on those criteria. I must say, I'm very fortunate to be in the presence of Bob. I recently attended Bob's boardroom readiness class where we talked about systemic risk and ways of measuring risk. And I know Bob's going to cover that in more detail today, but I just want to give a shout out to Bob for that. And so at the end of the day, it's about the combination of the methods to create the most comprehensive risk profiles that you can to enable your leaders to make risk-informed decisions. So in the companies that I've worked for, this has always been fun because while we were having a chuckle about quantitative versus non, is that you're going to find folks in organizations where when you talk about dollars and cents, they're like, come on down, help me understand how to tell a story that tells the story of value versus the risk I'm willing to take. And then you have others who say, I don't want to hear about your dollars and cents, it doesn't make sense to me. Just let me understand qualitatively what does this mean. And qualitatively could be a way in which you measure that in terms of the value to the individuals that are involved. And so for me, in all the organizations I've worked at, what I typically do is let's start by getting a conversation that says we have a taxonomy and nomenclature that we can all speak to, and that we're on the same page as we're talking about the measurements. And then let's talk about the components that need to be added to the measurement so we can connect our measurements to the way the organization drives measurements and outcomes and how the organization speaks. At the end of the day, if your strategy is one that doesn't fit into the culture, you're not going to be having the same conversation because culture eats strategy for breakfast any day of the week.
All right. Others?
Well, I have an interesting background because in addition to being a cybersecurity professional, I'm also an aviation safety officer and trained aircraft accident investigator. One of the things that safety and cybersecurity have in common is they are both all about the management of risk. That's it. You know, that's the mission of both of those activities. And let me tell you this, risk is far easier to measure in cybersecurity than it is in aviation. It is. One of the things that we need to establish in any organization is, hey, what are the metrics that we are going to use to be able to measure our risk? So we are lucky because we can measure things like exposed surface area. We can measure things like exposed vulnerabilities. We can measure things like failed attempts. Oh my gosh. Anybody who's ever done any log analysis knows that there's so many failed attempts, and that's a good thing to know because we know what level of attempts are being made to breach us. So we have to establish a set of metrics, know what we're going to measure, and then actively measure them on an ongoing basis. And that's how we know what our risk is. That's how we know what we're facing. And it's important to ensure that every organization engages in all those activities to establish and measure the metrics that allow them to see their risk.
Just let me add one legal footnote to that. You don't see much, if any, discussion of risk measurement in the legal cases, right? The lawyers talk about government and non-governmental standards and reasonableness. And so one of the goals that I have in my work and my co-authors is to link the legal discussion more directly to risk management, because quite surprisingly, when you look at it, it's not there.
Yeah, I'll jump on that really quick. So I follow CIS RAM at the VRI, right? And the concept there is quantifying your acceptable risk definition. All right, hang on a second. I'm going to do the better. Yeah. All right. So I follow CIS RAM, and we have to define what is the acceptable risk for our organization, right? And the way that goes about is you ask your SLT, well, hey, what's our acceptable risk? They have no idea what the hell you're talking about, right? So you have to educate them around the concept of reasonableness and then duty of care, right? Once you have those concepts and definitions for them, then you can talk about, well, let's talk about what does it mean for operational risk? What does it mean for brand risk? What does it mean for risk to our students, right? In terms of so we measure something called return on student investment, right? That is the #1 metric that we guide ourselves on in terms of our university and how well it's doing is, are we giving the students the right education that helps them get jobs at the right amount of money at the end of the day, right? So we measure against those things, and then we carve out, well, what is the acceptable risk for us? And by doing that, then we can have measurements around, well, what do we need to do to change that risk level to what is acceptable, right? And so we have, just like everyone else, your 5x5, your risk measurements, but at the executive level, we're really talking about more of brand risk, operational risk. We talk about those concepts of resiliency, right? That's when it really becomes important. But you have to define that because it's something that every organization is going to be different based off of what is important to your organization.
Can I give an example?
Certainly.
Yeah, so one example from the business standpoint that I thought might be helpful is quite recently, in the last couple of years, in one of the organizations I work for, there was a decision we had to make. And it was a decision around whether we put all our resources together to ensure that we maintain PCI compliance, or we suffer the burden and get a bridge letter. And doing that versus trying to do that and trying to get a SOC 2 Type 2 report. And so one of the things that we did in terms of decision making was exactly what Fred talked about. It was the acceptable risk in terms of what at the end of the day was going to break the business, prevent us from earning revenue, break digital trust with our customers, what was urgent versus important. So PCI and SOC 2 Type 2 are not required by law. But if you want to work with the big banks, you better have your PCI in place. And if you're a company, lost it. Hello? Okay. If you're an organization that you don't have a storefront, you can't take cash, and it's all about credit cards, then you're kind of up the whatever creek you want to call it. And so Quantification of that resulted in what was at risk. What was at risk was about $33 million to the bottom line in terms of indirect and direct fines, breaches, and reputation damage. What was also at risk was that in order to get a SOC 2 Type 2, the idea is that SOC 2 Type 2 would expose or make it possible for us to earn more revenue of about $40 million. So in one case, you're going to get fined. In another case, you're going to get more revenue. Bottom line is what keeps your business going at the end of the day. And so we chose to take the resources from one and add it to the other and delay SOC 2 Type 2 and ensure that we got PCI compliance. At the end of the day, for every business, you're going to make a trade-off of some sort. And the trade-off, the best way to do it is to ensure that you have all the components that allow you to make that trade-off decision so that you can keep the base, build resiliency, and stand up behind your product the right way. Hope that helps.
All right. Starting with Fred, and then allowing the rest of the group to jump in. How do you see organizations incorporating cybersecurity risk into the broader enterprise risk conversation?
I think you have to kind of first start with an understanding of, does your company do enterprise risk management, right? Because not every company does. And some that can often be a foreign term, right, for some organizations. Now, when I work for at Zurich Insurance, for example, obviously they know how to do enterprise risk management, right? They're an insurance business. But in a lot of the smaller organizations, they weren't doing ERM at all. So you can't have a conversation around cyber risk if they don't look at the overall risk to the organization, right? So again, as a cyber practitioner, then I'm helping to educate the SLT not only about cyber risk, but how to do and quantify ERM as well. But once again, you establish those grounds. And one of the interesting things about ERM is, at least I found in terms of some of the maturity of the programs, is they're very bad at risk quantification in general, right? They do a kind of a thumb in the air, or they'll do a survey and ask like, hey, what are you guys concerned about at the SLT level, right? And you know, is this a concern or is this a concern? And people kind of do, you know, again, yeah, no, whatever, right? So I think as cyber leaders, now that we have more established, although not perfect, ways to quantify risk, we can apply those principles also to ERM and help the organization kind of understand, well, let's look at this holistically in terms of overall risk, and then talk about how does cyber risk map into that overall enterprise risk. I think that makes you more valuable as a leader and in the organization, but then secondarily, it gives you a better idea of what is really considered acceptable risk in the organization. Does it align with how you're mapping it on your acceptable risk definitions? Because a lot of times people may say this is what we think is the acceptable risk, but ultimately when you look at it at the overall enterprise risk management, those things are not aligned. And so it's your job to help them steer the committee, to help them understand, well, let's align these two things and let's talk about how much risk is truly acceptable, and then that way you can fight for how much budget is appropriate based off of the risk. And if you ask for too much money, it's you kind of look foolish in the sense of like, hey, you know, you're asking for $5 million, let's say a year, right, just as an example, but there's these large enterprise risks that exist that there's no funding towards, right? I think you have to understand like, hey, let's take care of these larger risks and understand that, yeah, while cyber is important to me, I understand from the business perspective, these larger risks need more attention to my cyber program.
All right, others?
I think in the corporate world today, particularly for major enterprises, one of the things that I believe improves the effectiveness of cybersecurity is to look at it, as Fred was saying exactly, as part of enterprise risk. Because if you're not doing that, you're siloing things. And of course, one of the things that we want to prevent whenever possible in an enterprise is silos, right? We want everything to work seamlessly across the entire enterprise. So we want cybersecurity risk to be a part of the broader picture of enterprise risk. One of the ways to achieve that, and I'm a big proponent of this, is if your company's sufficiently large and if it's a sufficient part of concern, is to have someone who has the role of chief risk officer. And in fact, that's the appropriate place for your CISO to report, is to the chief risk officer. In other words, someone who has an exact responsibility of management of risk for the entire organization, reporting directly to the CEO. Are there any chief risk officers here? I always ask that question, not that I have that opportunity a lot, but, and it's kind of disappointing, the fact that I go to conferences like this, because I always think I should see some chief risk officers, because this is a part of their responsibility. But they are folks who honestly need to have a big picture about risk, because they have who works for them. Not just cybersecurity risk, insurance all comes under them, safety all comes under them, and in some organizations, even aspects of financial risk for the organization. Certainly real estate and other capital investments come under them, because every capital investment is a risk, right? So, that's what I believe is one of the things that organizations can do to ensure that cybersecurity is literally just an aspect of risk to the entire organization. The other side of it is ensuring that every manager in an organization understands and recognizes that they have a responsibility to manage cybersecurity risk within their particular component of the organization. That it's not just something that the cybersecurity department does, right? It's not something IT is responsible for. It's something everyone is responsible for. And that's what enables enterprises to build a cybersecurity program that's going to have the proper approach and ensure that that responsibility is distributed across the organization.
Other than seconding what Ray just said, I'm good. I'd add legal risk. Right.
Right. And so, the chief counsel may be under the chief risk officer, which would be a very good place for them to be.
One of my jobs is to try to create lawyers that can actually talk to it.
Right.
Okay. Well, we frequently find ourselves at the intersection of cybersecurity risk, compliance requirements, and the law. So I want to throw a question down to Richard. With the law requiring, quote unquote, reasonable security, and I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, how much guidance does the law provide about what counts as reasonable security?
Well, let me divide that into two parts. One is the practical advice that what the law is going to look at is your conformity to government requirements and standards and industry standards and a general notion of reasonableness. And so what you need to do from a practical point of view is basically what everybody else is doing decent does, right? And so compliance with the industry standard is presumptive reasonableness, very hard for any plaintiff to defeat. That's what you see in the cases, right? Like I said, there's a standard criticism of that we teach the first-year students, is that the industry standard may be far off the mark with respect to the ideal of risk management. And what you don't see and the guidance you don't get is about risk management and a critique of the industry standards. So maybe at most in the Federal Trade Commission. So what you see in the cases is egregious failures of security. The law will look at your access control broadly construed, including like network segmentation, your monitoring of traffic for suspicious behavior, and your use of encryption. And the cases see people fall far below that. They face liability. You don't see any cases, close call cases in the courts. And so very little guidance. One of my co-authors has tried to fix this, but we haven't made much progress.
I have to say, in teaching prospective cybersecurity professionals, one of the key things that I point to them is, hey, there are some standards out there that appear to be relatively complete and comprehensive. And if you're searching for standards to comply with, one of the great ones, honestly, is 23 NYCRR Part 500. because it was well-crafted, it is very complete, it takes a concern for risk. So if you're in the banking industry, one of the things I've discovered is everybody's trying to follow that, even if you're not in New York State. I've worked with banks here in Chicago that are just Chicago-based banks, but they want to comply with that, right? Because they see that it is a reasonable standard for their industry. And the other one, of course, because so many people fall under this category, is NIST Special Publication 800-171, which then allows you to be CMMC. And in academia, we have to be CMMC compliant. It's a requirement. So we're already reaching for that. And that also entails us doing some things that are interesting in the area of risk management, like implementation of zero trust, because it's almost impossible to be CMMC compliant without implementing zero trust. So that's the key, is to find a standard that will work and then just make sure that you follow through on it. And that's the hardest part, is following through and seeing that seeing that the organization is fully compliant with that standard. But there are standards that I believe do have a sufficient emphasis on risk, and those are the standards people should be looking to follow from a legal perspective.
Yeah, now let me add one thing that I forgot to add. The law legal liability is primarily concerned with harms to consumers, right? Not harms to the business. Risk management, when you talk to business people, is about managing business losses, right? We lack information about the degree of harm to consumers from a data breach and the probability of those harms. And so risk management for consumers is, you just simply see very little of that in the cases except in what I see, and it's the critical concern of the law. And many of the standards don't speak directly to that.
And Fred, you talked a little bit about CIS and CIS RAM earlier, and I know that a core component of that is due care. You want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so the concept is really, as Richard kind of said, there's not a true definition, right? So you have to define it before someone else defines it for you, right? That's what PCI was kind of trying to do, right, in the payment card industry, right? They came up with a standard before the government or whoever else comes around and says, hey, this should be your standard. So using duty of care is, the concept ultimately is around, are you doing what you should be doing to protect your consumers, your employees, your data that exists in your organization appropriately. And if you can say that, hey, based off of our risk profile, this is where we think we exist in terms of our duty of care, then you're kind of in a good spot, because at least if you ever get litigated against, you can say, hey, we made the effort to say, define it for our organization. This is what it's based off of. This is what we are mapping towards based off of what we've seen the risk is. And I think it'll probably go a long way. It's hard to say. We still need to see more litigation happen to fully understand. But maybe Richard's new book on case law will cover some of this. That we can, peer into a little bit more of, is this going to be hold water, right, for us? One of the things I'll touch on really quick, Richard mentioned, is comparisons, and I worked for education recently, and before that I worked 6 years in the healthcare industry, right? Both of which have terrible cybersecurity standards as an industry on average. So. But at the board level, the first thing they ask you is, well, how do you look, or how do we look against our peers? And I always have to educate them and say, let's not compare ourselves against our peers because they suck. And so, and again, it's an education model, right? Like, you have to educate them and be like, let's not compare ourselves against, the bottom of the barrel. Let's, compare ourselves against the top where we really need to be, because our data is just as important as some of these industries such as financial.
And I just want to point out for the audience that Fred did call for more litigation. I'm going to leave that alone. All right, we've got just a couple minutes left. So they had a couple of questions on here, but we do want to keep things moving along. So I do want to open it up to the audience to see if there are any questions for our panelists this morning. Yes?
Stella brought up
Yeah, so the numbers, thank you so much, great question. The numbers that I've seen, and I think by default, because I've worked for a lot of global companies, is the highest number you can come up with based on the countries and regions that you work in. And so for those companies that work in Europe, you have to go for GDPR, which talks to 4% of your annual revenue, right? And in some companies, for me, that has translated to $450 million in terms of what you're at risk of being, fined. And so based on your risk appetite, if you have cyber insurance that will cover $450 million, good for you. If you don't, you better build that into your framework for how you accept risk overall. On the other side of it is really who can accept risk in the organization as well, right? And so what I found to work really well is when you align that to who can sign off on how much money in the organization. So if you can make a purchase for $50 million, good on you. You can have a risk appetite of $50 million, because if something were to happen, you would have $50 million on hand to pay for it. And so making sure that you're aligned in the signing and the approvals to the risk appetite of the organization is equally as important.
So I'll give you a different formula, and I steal from Bob. So looking at total revenue of your organization based off of what IT generates, right? Because ultimately, cyber is a risk mitigation for IT, right? If you think about it from that perspective. So how much does your IT organization, I shouldn't say that, how much does your revenue generated require IT, right? For most organizations, I would argue that the majority of your revenue probably requires IT resources for it to generate revenue, right? So then you take that and then you discount it by your cyber program, right? And the way I do that is I look at the maturity of my cyber program, back to CMMC, right? And I use that as a multiplier, right? And then ultimately, that will help me to define how much risk I'm mitigating based off of my cyber program. Then I have to look at how much risk am I mitigating based off of cyber insurance, right? And I take all those numbers, and then finally what I'm left with is the residual risk to my organization. And at the executive level, then we need to decide, is that an acceptable amount of risk for our program, right? Or do I need to increase my cyber insurance, or do I need to increase spend in my controls to mitigate the risk even further, right, from a cyber perspective? Those are tough conversations to have, but that's how I try to help quantify it as well.
All right. Well, Steve just indicated we are short on time, so I want to thank my panelists, Stella Danso, Fred Kwong, Ray Trigstad, and Richard Warner. Thank you very much. Thank the audience for your participation, and look forward to the rest of today's conversation.
Good to see you. How you doing?
Thank you. That was fantastic. So it does look like you were all 2 steps ahead of me here, but we do have a 15-minute networking break, and we will be back here at 10:45. So we'll see you soon.
Coursera this summer, and Coursera teaching the classes all hand. So all I have to do is office hours, and they're paying me. And I can be anywhere. I'm going to be in California for part of the time. Yeah, it's a really good deal. But, and then my actual retirement date is August 17th. So the week before classes, I'm actually going to work solidly that week. Stuff. Hi. Good news. Bad news. Normal. I don't know, because I have a big gap where I didn't interact with them. I am interacting with them right now because I'm also the ROTC liaison for the provost office. Yeah, between the time I retired and the time I became the liaison, I didn't really have much interface with the ROTC. Yeah. I don't think I've had it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
I've been talking to a few grad students.
You ought to get people from, what do you do?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's.
So you're looking for interns?
I
You probably want people from our IT program, because that's where the principal emphasis is on cybersecurity. That's where we have currently have most of our cybersecurity degrees. Cyber forensics and security is our terribly named degree. Yeah. Next fall, we're switching to a degree, Master of Cybersecurity. It's actually got 4 departments involved in it, so it's going to be a much better, much broader degree. Yeah, we have plenty of folks to have as interns. Do you have a requirement or an expectation for interns that they be citizens? Because a lot of our students are international students, some of whom are amazingly good, amazingly competent. Okay. Hi. Oh, good. I'm glad to know some of them are going, so I always encourage our students to go to this. I tell them this is the kind of places you can go and get a job. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Okay. So that's. Oh, sorry. Are we with tags or without tags? Okay.
But with the tags, we got to make sure it's facing out the right way.
Alright, so we know who we are.
No crazy folks. My kids always do that. You know.
Okay, so Tony Oracle is the Cook County Commissioners. That's the county side. That's the city side. Which, just contextually, that's all. So no, it's all good.
Yeah, I'm really.
We have a campus right here.
I know. The key piece is I know I have to get a subpoena. That's the only way I'm going to find out who the registrant is, and then I can do a cease and desist.
Yeah, we need a lawyer to write the lawyer letter too.
All right, sounds good.
It's their host that I'm concerned about.
We don't know.
I know who the host is. I mean, I don't off the top of my head, but I know who their registrant is for their domain, and that's who I need to.
Yeah, you got to go together.
Right, and they have the private registration. So I sent 3 emails to the registrar, and they won't answer me. You know, so it's like I got to get a subpoena to get. I got to get legal recourse.
Find somebody in the building.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Hey, Bruce.
Thank you.
Bruce, always a pleasure to work with you.
Likewise.
That's great.
So I wish we got to the AI question, but I think we got snipped a few minutes, so that's all right.
That's okay.
Yeah, the line for the lawyers is, for you lawyers, is next door different. It makes a big difference to the state of play if you're one of the people that has to defend. Huge. And you probably need to know a little bit about that as a lawyer to ask the right questions. But sadly, they don't need to know how it works.
Which book you guys want? There are 2. One is CISO Compass and another one is the Privacy Compass.
Based on the rules of my thing, I can't, so.
Oh, you can. Oh, okay. You cannot take it.
No.
I can take it.
I need to.
I can take a book from a friend.
I'll do the CISO.
Yeah, me too. Okay.
Before you make sure that.
Okay. Sure. Are we gonna go for drinks after tonight? Or?
Yeah. Okay. We go to, you know that Dylan's is closed.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Are you close?
So yeah, we are
That's
going
a shame.
we're going to downstairs. What is that? Same name like.
Sorry.
I'm going to announce it.
We'll figure it out.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got
Good.
stuck at a kid's
Yeah, back
appointment.
to work.
Yeah, Gcsi. Hey, good to see you as well.
Bruce, that's why
Gcsi. I made a sign for the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, no PowerPoint. It's like this. Yeah,
So we have a fireside.
fireside.
Oh, that's
and,
this afternoon.
Yeah, another fireside.
This is a fireside.
No, this one. This is a morning fireside now.
So the problem is we go from a fireside right to a panel again.
Yeah,
So they're gonna have to sit back here.
right.
There's just no way we
Yeah,
can
the
do it.
fireside chat also, I'll ask them to take two. Which
If they
one are
just
the
take the
working?
2 seats right here,
These
always
two.
at the closest to the podium.
That's good,
Will
yeah.
be what we do. And
Okay,
we'll check
these
mics.
two are, yeah, okay.
Right, everything else is turned on. So actually, and the bad part is I don't wanna move the mics either. I'm not-
And what we'll do is, this one.
No, I'll move the two next to each other. You don't, do you want them to be separated?
Close to. Yeah. Or what they can do is, turn this one, yeah.
What do you hear out of,
And quick question for you.
The two first microphones are live.
Okay.
So we'll need you to both sit at these first two chairs
Okay.
for the fireside chat.
Yeah. Where's the fire?
It feels like it's on this. Is it Lothian?
Yes, Lothian. Mid-Lothian, you know?
Perfect. All right, I can work with that. Oh, it's the wrong way. That's not really going to help anyone, is it? There we go.
Forbes.
Easy to pronounce. I'd say so. How do I keep this the right way?
It's just gonna keep twisting on the wind as it were.
We'll just do our best. That's all we can do. Tell us. I'm not sure. We can send out the cavalry to go find him. There he is. In the
Right here. How you doing? Yeah, you too.
You as well.
Yeah, this one.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you and welcome back. I hope you all had a great break. I suspect we will continue to see people trickle in, but let's remain quiet and respectful while we have Tellis Williams and John Lothian. Tellis has over 25 years of experience in varying levels of information technology and information security and holds a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Very exciting. As a fellow SEC, I do appreciate that. So wonderful. Thank you. John Lothian is a Chicago-based journalist and financial media entrepreneur. He is a former futures broker, trader, commodity trading advisor, and electronic trading early adopter. As the founder in 2000 of John Lothian Newsletter and publisher of John Lothian News, JLN, he pioneered blogging in the futures industry, where his newsletter has become a must-read among financial markets, industry executives, and professionals globally. So please help me in welcoming them both with a round of applause for their fireside chat. Thank you. Over to you. And also, please do not be afraid to pick up the mics as you turn your heads. Sometimes we can't hear in the audience as well.
Good deal.
So, thank you.
I promise not to turn my head. So, welcome, Tellis. Thank you. So, from my earliest days with computers, cybersecurity was an issue. The first time that I was given time on a computer screen as opposed to using punch cards in college to write computer code, my professor said, be wary of the login screen because upperclassmen have been known to write computer programs that look like login screens but are meant to steal your login credentials and your time. So from the very earliest, of my time in front of a screen, it's been an issue. So let's start with a little bit about your background.
Sure.
Tell us, how did you get into cybersecurity as a career?
There's a funny answer to that. So I'd spent years in technology and as an engineer, and on the networking side. And that's when security was literally just part of network engineering. We tweaked the bell, hit a button, did things to secure the network as best we could then. When security started breaking out as its own separate entity, I saw one thing that just really enticed me. Those guys could tell the CEO no, theoretically. That was enough for me. I could tell my executive, I could tell my manager certainly no. So that was the reason I went over to the security side. But once I got over to this side, I realized really quickly that this was suited for me. I I'm that guy that would, with the punch cards, that would go, that would steal your credentials. That was me, just to do it, right? But not for nefarious reasons. So I guess I'm one of the good hackers.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Now, you were part of the team hired to build the Dream Exchange.
Yes.
And you're now a consultant for them. Can you walk me through the considerations for building a securities exchange?
A lot of heartache, a lot of pain, and a lot of forethought. It was one good thing about the way Dream Exchange was constructed is that they brought in expertise at the beginning. To bring me in while the development of the exchange was occurring was something I don't think we could ever replace as far as good, efficient things to do. Because we're able to build into the system as the system was being built, layers and layers of security. So kudos to those guys for having the forethought, for Joe Sakala for having the forethought to bring in the expertise at the beginning and not having security come in as an afterthought, tearing things down and trying to build it back up.
What was the team like that built it? What were the different pieces that they had?
Oh, wow. One fabulous thing is that we had a couple of guys that came from NASDAQ that were some of the top architects over at NASDAQ to come over to us and to help us with building and built the exchange. It was my first time with a startup entity. And for all of the C-levels, we had to really grind out and do our work as well as do the work of our subordinates until we could bring in subordinates. So that whole build-out process was laborious, to say the least, but well worth it. We all had that, have the drive that came from understanding what our mission was and understanding that this mission was bigger than us. And so we did the hours and the time and the sweat and built it out and then brought in the necessary components and still bringing in components to fill those pieces.
Okay. So was it built on new technology or was it built on, you said components, but yeah. Was it some proprietary technology as well? Or I know they're doing some unique things with the types of securities that they're going to trade.
Yes.
So what considerations were there for some of the uniqueness of the securities?
Well, the best thing about applying as an SRO is that everything is so heavily regulated. We look exactly like the other exchanges from a technology standpoint. Probably best of breed in that we don't have any legacy technologies that we have to deal with. And we found a way to get to market faster. Instead of doing a complete build ourselves, we went over to Memex and actually had them to build an exchange for us, and which mirrors their exchange, which had already been approved by the SEC. So we found, again, more efficiencies in the system.
Okay. And then what was it like dealing with the SEC through this process?
The SEC, I love them. The good thing is that, and I applaud this, that they are diligent, that they absolutely are concerned with you getting it right. So I don't think it's an issue with the SEC or dealing with the SEC was the issue. The issue was making sure that we did everything that we could do to make their job easier.
Were there considerations at all with any state regulators or FINRA or any of that as well?
Given the requirements now and given the suggestions coming from, not just suggestions, but the requirements of Reg SCI, and following our, just following this, we have now in all SROs have the requirement to be fully compliant with all of this. We don't have anything that we can skip. And when you have that in place, you really have a map to what you need to do, and you have to do everything. And so that was the difficult part in that, too.
Okay. Were there any particular concerns from the brokerage community in terms of what you had to deal with them with the cybersecurity?
No, actually, it has been a wonderful experience dealing with the brokerage community, in that this is one of those things that everyone sees a need for, and we've received a lot of support from the community, as well as the other exchanges. They're welcoming us aboard. I think they're looking at us as a feeder to them one day. I think we'll keep our guys.
Okay. And then how about the market-making community? Were there any special considerations there that they had for cybersecurity?
They want us to be as secure as possible, obviously. But the larger considerations are just making sure that we adhere to all of the standard regulations and best practices. I don't believe in complying with regulation for the sake of complying with regulation. I believe in just being secure. And in being secure, you've covered your regulations, right? And your regulatory obligations. So I think that's the approach that we took, just to try to ensure that we have the best product possible.
Okay. Now, Dream Exchange isn't approved yet, but did you have to run through some kind of practice runs and the like, and how did those go?
They went extremely well, and yes, I'm a firm believer that you don't put anything out without testing, and then testing, and then testing. You should know what your risks are prior to anything going into production. And you want to get it right the first time. You don't want these guys coming back, because you may not make it. So just making sure that, I think we gauged more what we were doing as rather than what someone else would come in and see. If we shored up our end, then we were pretty good.
Okay.
And we're still in review, so.
Yeah. So there was recently a big hack in the Japanese brokerage community. Millions of dollars were stolen. What was your reaction to that, and what do you think needs to be, done to mitigate that risk?
There are a couple of things that I have to say about that. One, due diligence is important. No matter what industry you come from, your due diligence is important. So ensuring that you're doing the basic things of patching, that you're doing the basic necessary steps to cover all of your different towers of support and security. That is the only way to really be secure. And even then, you're subject to being breached, right? The issue is that if you're doing your basic due diligence, and most of these breaches, let's be honest, has come from not doing basic due diligence, patching being one of those issues. And so preventing your team from getting into a mundane state where everything is just normal, I see this every day, to get them to actually watch for the little small hiccups are key to us being secure. And that is simply my methodology, no matter what industry I'm going to be in, right?
Yeah. So, have there been some other types of breaches like that have drawn your attention or concern, and what were the causes of concern for you?
I'm a little different. I kind of like breaches when it happens to other people, because they become great talking points to the boards and to getting budget for me. So I like it when it's someone else. Sorry if it's one of you. But as far as, what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
So are there some other breaches that you are concerned about, and then what what are they some examples that you use to the boards? Are there some favorite ones? And then what do you think caused, or needs to be done to mitigate those?
Oh, I have so many favorite ones. It's hard to name now because they come out so frequently. But almost each one of those breaches that occur, if one occurs tomorrow, I can guarantee you it'll be the same issues where people haven't covered due diligence. That becomes our biggest problem. We have so much to cover. And to get your team to constantly cover that on a daily basis, we have to be right every single day. And with that being the case, we must do it. Almost all breaches to me are again, they're something of alarm, but I'm not alarmed at all.
Yeah. There recently was, I can't remember what government agency it was, but it was right after Doge went into it. There was a big breach from the Russians into it.
Yeah.
Kind of thing where they had Doge logins and everything like that. Do you think that we're that whole effort is brought the level of security to that process that they need to?
I certainly hope it does. Entities using offensive attacks, offensive security attacks, are no surprise to any of us in this room. It is a surprise to everyone else who's hearing it on the news. So hopefully public pressure will get the government to start aligning some of the things that we have as best practices and want as best practices to protect us all. Because we are looking at nation states, and many of us, almost all of us as companies, we can't protect against nation states. It takes another nation state to do so. But to get the appropriate awareness around it, anything that brings that awareness about is great. It's horrible that it happens, but great if we do something about it.
Yeah.
That's the if.
Yeah. So I was down in Florida for October. I have a little place down there and right in Sarasota. And while I was there, hurricane decided to target Sarasota. It was so nice. And so I had to evacuate, and that was Milton. And so I ran up to ICE's headquarters in Atlanta, and I got a tour of their kind of global cybersecurity center there, and it's very impressive. And they have these huge maps up, screens up on the wall, and they're showing, where they're being attacked constantly all around the world, and the huge number of attacks that they are being hit with. What are you planning on for the Dream Exchange, in terms of like how many attacks and how are you going to mitigate, mitigate that?
Those attacks are increasing every single day. And again, for everyone in this room, outside of a stock exchange, we're all, if you looked at any of our boards and if you mapped our attacks, we'd all have boards with a bunch of dots on them everywhere, right? Because those attacks are ever vigilant. The bad guys don't stop. They don't stop, so we can't. And again, it goes back to simple due diligence, understanding where your risks are, so that you know what to protect, how many layers of protection to put around it, and prayer.
Yeah. The other thing that I was very impressed with ICE is that they had a whole team of internal hackers and then also contracted hackers that are constantly attacking their systems for them, looking for vulnerabilities, and so this red team, blue team approach. So have you used that approach in the past, and what does that done for you?
Oh, absolutely. And my first role as CISO was in 2015. And one of the first things I did, it was actually some of the greatest advice I received upon entering this role. And I got it from Michael Phillips, actually. He's like, find a way to find your problems before your problems find you. And so red team, blue team exercises became one of the first things I tried to implement in the organization to, let's test what we believe is true. Let's test that the controls, the internal controls that we have around all of these things are actually working. How do you do that? Attack. Attack, protect, learn. Attack, protect, learn. So that became part of the methodology of my structure, and it still is today.
So what do you do in a red team, blue team scenario with the little green men that show up?
I.e. AI. Now, AI poses a whole new risk, and I think we're all trying to get our heads around some of our threats and our risks associated with it. We know the common risk, but we don't know what's coming down the pipe. And at this point, AI is advancing so fast. And this has been one of my thoughts surrounding AI from the beginning. I saw the movie's Terminator. So it scares me that if we don't put protection and take our time in implementing and in building out AI structures, that we're putting protection in at the same time, and not just let the market lead and run to the fastest thing that it can do. Because you're talking about a tool that the makers of the tool went to Congress and warned them that this could end humanity. That's an alerting thing to me. And so I take them at their word. Unfortunately, we're probably past that point. Now that AI can generate AI, but we really need to get our heads wrapped around all of the capabilities and then the protections. And it is an ever learning and still going on thing.
All right, so what are your favorite cybersecurity movies?
Actually, it's more of an action movie, but it's still cybersecurity. And I can't think of the name of it. Felicia Rashad played the victim initially, and she was breached from malware. There you go, Beekeeper. Love The Beekeeper. Favorite movie of all time.
All right. And
that's why this guy goes berserk. And for those of you who haven't seen Beekeeper, the hero goes on a vengeance just to attack everyone who stole all this lady's money, and it was just fantastic.
Yep. He's got a whole new series, it looks like.
I want all of them.
So we were talking earlier about the aggression, the aggressive use of cyber security and cyber on people. You know, we've seen the most blatant example of that is the Russian-Ukraine war. What lessons have you learned from that experience?
Yeah, again, I don't think I learned anything new. I don't think any of us are surprised by the offensive threat that these nation states pose. This is becoming new to everyone else. But what it tells me is that we are at a constant, pretty much war, all the time from the cyber standpoint. And there are some unannounced wars that are happening between countries now, nation states, that are unannounced but are happening by way of cyber. And so for me, it also means that groups like InfraGard, for instance, where there's a collaboration between the private sector and the government entities to protect us all. Those are so important. I think that there needs to be a little bit more emphasis on that. If there could be sponsorship from the government, where they actually put some money behind it, we need it. And we need the expertise of the private sector.
How about the movie Black Hat? Did you like that one?
I didn't see it.
You didn't see it?
I did not see it.
No.
I not only did not see it, I never attend Black Hat or RSA.
See, that one had a nice commodities trading. They manipulated the futures markets in order to make a bunch of money, in order to finance so.
Also, I really need to see that.
Yeah, it was.
Thanks for the heads up, John.
Yeah, yeah, it had a good market-related thing. Otherwise,
Awesome.
I wouldn't have watched it. But,
Gotcha. It's on my list.
So, this whole, I'm going to talk about this aggression thing again a little bit here, because it is new to the broader community that there is this state of war that has been underway for a lot of, for a long time. And it's something that I've said for a long time that, we've been at a state of war with Russia, in a cyber war for quite some time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so now we have a space command, and we have the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, Do we need a cyber command in order to be able to defend or to be able to have aggressive, in the next war, instead of fighting the last war, to fight the next war?
Yeah.
Is that something that the United States should be looking at, and can we get away with that from a PR standpoint?
Yeah. So I think all countries have that to some degree, not announced, obviously, and probably contained within various agencies. But we are in that constant attack. I am a little leery, though, of some of the suggestions that private sector be given the ability to do offensive attacks. Although we could use it against bad guys if we detect it and went back in. The problem is that I don't trust private sector enough to not attack their competitor, right? And to use those same tools against each other. And all it takes is one or two to start that process. So I'm a little leery of that, but from a government standpoint, we absolutely need that. And again, we need more funding behind where the expertise is. The expertise is out here in the private sector to get all the smart guys in this room to be able to literally gauge and assess and to assist in making sure that we're safe.
Yeah. Does there need to be multinational associations or treaties or something as well for this type of approach?
Probably. I'm assuming that you would have to, and you'd get groups like NATO that would probably link together or something like that. But all that we'd be doing is announcing the things that have already been going on under it. But and I'm not sure how much that would expand based on that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. At this time, we are out of time. But I'd like to thank Telus for his time up here and the audience. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you. Let me thank you, John. First of all, let me say it is just an absolute pleasure to know you. And to gain insight from you has been invaluable to me. So thank you very much, sir. It's been an honor.
Yeah. Pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Missed the yellow, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you again. That was absolutely fantastic. Very insightful. Do we have John Johnson in the room? I think we have you coming up. Yeah, oh, there you are. You're hiding in the back for us. Okay, so another round of applause for our fireside chat. That was wonderful. Thank you very much. I would now like to introduce Dr. John Johnson, who will be speaking next. He will moderate the Highly Regulated Industries panel. Dr. John Johnson is the founder and CEO of Aligned Security and the founder and president of Docent Institute, a nonprofit advancing cybersecurity education and careers. He serves as a fractional CISO and executive advisor and leads youth outreach through Docent's K-12 hacker camps modeled after DEF CON roots, which he helped run for 10 years. I need you to answer for all of us where you find the time to do these things, truly. It's quite impressive. John has held senior cyber roles at Campbell's, Deloitte, and was global security architect at John Deere for 18 years. He's a founding member of multiple cybersecurity organizations and advises startups like NetThunder and MedBlocks. And without further ado, if you would please come and join us, a round of applause while he makes his way down here for us. And I will leave you to introduce everyone else. Wonderful. Thank you.
Should I sit or? Well, if we have our panelists here, Joe, Dan, Michael, and Adam, love to have you guys come up. And I don't have such an illustrious introduction for each of you, but you can see where they're located on the slides here. We have Joe at the end is CISO at Tokyo Marine Highland. Michael Phillips is the owner of VSEC LLC, which provides virtual CISO and other advisory services. And Michael has done a lot of other things to have familiarity with highly regulated industries. And Adam Lewis, who's now CISO at Alliant Credit Union.
Deputy.
What?
Deputy.
Deputy CISO.
Can't take my boss's title.
I appreciate that. All right. Would you guys like to let me just start off by saying I have a little blurb here that may be in the, I don't think it's in the brochure, so I'll read it. Cybersecurity leaders need to advise on and balance risk versus opportunity in a world where technology is advancing rapidly. The threat landscape is commensurately growing. More and more devices and people are connecting to the internet, and they need to be aligned with business objectives. The panel will explore the challenges and opportunities for highly regulated industries. The regulatory landscape is another ever-expanding area that the CISO needs to be aware of, particularly in finance, education, healthcare, transportation, critical infrastructure, and other highly regulated industries. So if, Joe, would you introduce yourself, where you are and what industry you're in?
Sure. Joe Gcsi. I'm the CISO and oversee infrastructure and service desk at Tokyo Marine Highland. We're a small insurance company focusing on flood and specialty property, some fine arts. We are kind of part of a global Tokyo Marine group, which has, I think, 40 different companies around the globe. We're just a small little one here in Chicago, but we get to participate with some of the different aspects of that and get some insight and some benefits of being part of that. I've been here about 3.5 years. Before that, I ran the security program at a managed service provider. We worked with law firms, legal departments, but I spent most of my career in various financial services, about 20 years now. Started as a consultant, then spent some time at Northern Trust and William Blair, an investment bank here in the city. Mostly working in security and IT risk.
Michael?
Hey, Mike Phillips. I know most of you in the audience, so I'm here disguised as myself today, although I work at many different organizations across many different institutions. Former head of information security with the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, former head of security for the Americas for UBS Investment Banking, so very highly regulated. And today, I also serve as the head of the BISO program office for AbbVie Pharmaceuticals. And I still run a couple of contracting groups that we do virtual CISO advisory, part of the USS Secret Service Steering Committee, part of InfraGard, part of ISACA, part of ISSA, on and on and on. And it's good to see a lot of my students here. I also am a professor over at DePaul University, where I teach the master's curriculum for information security and information systems auditing. And someone made a comment earlier about the teaching professors being rewarded by seeing our students and our former staff go on to become CISOs and things like that. And really glad to see a lot of my students here and a couple of CISOs as well.
Dan?
I never thought I would say I have an easy job compared to Michael. I'm the CISO at CME Group, obviously financial services. I've been there about a decade. Prior experience, consulting, Allstate, Bank of America. Started out my career in the Air Force.
And Adam?
All right, so yeah, Deputy CISO at Alliant. Before that, spent a lot of time in government and public safety, software and technology areas. Ran the Chicago chapter of OWASP for a while. These days, working with Walter and a few others, putting on the ChyberCon conference. And proud IT alum, so go Hawks.
We got a critical infrastructure failure. That's a systemic risk, Carlos. So anyhow, do you find that, it's just a general question here, do you find that being in a heavily regulated industry, that you get your board and your directors are more responsive to the needs of, hey, we have to do these things because they have to meet that minimum bar?
1,000%. I've been on both sides, and it's night and day difference.
Coming from manufacturing and from startups recently, that's different. When they're driven, like somebody mentioned SOC 2 Type 2 earlier, if they have to provide that in order to get customers, then it's very important to them. But if they're not in a heavily regulated industry, oftentimes it's quite a different discussion.
I'd agree with that. I think it's a huge help to go and say, I'd love to let the stuff slide, but the regulators say we have to. And you can kind of point to them as the quote unquote bad guys to help you along. A lot of people think it's the right thing to do, but you need that stick with the carrot sometimes. And with the managed service provider, overseeing law firms and legal departments that don't have to do some of these things, they want to do it to help their clients, but it's a cost directly out of their pocket that is kind of absorbed differently through risk and compliance and some of the financials. So it definitely helps to go in and say, the regulators are pushing this, and they go, okay, I guess we have to.
So one of the things that we're experiencing these days, I think everyone has used ChatGPT in the room by now. We have emerging technologies like AI, and we've got, quantum computing that's threatening to expose decades of secrets. I think most of us are still safe because we're not a valuable enough target for the economics to have the adversary go after us necessarily, but our companies are not in that boat. So I would think that the highly regulated industries must be very concerned about these emergent risks due to technology. Is this a game changer, or is this efficiency play with good marketing?
I think that's not a question of if it will be a game changer, it's kind of how and when. The challenge in highly regulated industry is that the regulation can't keep pace with the change in emerging technologies as they start to roll out. We see our businesses want to take advantage of those really without thinking about how are they going to manage the risk that those new technologies can introduce. You think about Gen AI today, it's probably where cloud was, several years ago. And today, most organizations are figuring out how best to leverage the cloud as they look to move forward. So I think it really underscores a comment that was made earlier on the risk panel that you need a program built on standards that's got flexibility to account for emerging technologies. I have to figure it out long before the regulators come and start to ask me questions about it.
I have embraced AI for many years, and some of you may have seen me on a couple of AI panels, and I'm always the contrarian in that I think it's beyond the, being afraid of it. I think embracing it and, balancing innovation with cyber defense is a good thing. I advise on a couple of startups now. One is a Reg AI group, and they are using AI to continuously monitor their compliance to a lot of the regulations that they have. They have self-healing solutions out there that, you know, we all know IDS, IPS, but now there's posture management solutions out there. And so when something's not configured right, it self-heals itself, right? We need to get ahead of what's happening with quantum computing. We all know that all the RSA and everything is at risk, but if we start embracing things and figure out ways to get ahead of it using these tools and not just being afraid of these tools, I think we could be way ahead of our competitors who are going to be trying to, you know, patch things on at the last minute to catch up with it and put guardrails in place. You know, I'm in 2 organizations now where the guardrails went in a long time ago, right? And they're doing very well with how they've set up their use of AI, how they have a closed system, how we block folks from going out to ChatGPT and others. It's where do you want to be? Do you want to be dragged along with the future, or do you want to control where it goes? That's my perspective on it. And I agree. I think we should embrace it. I think we should put the guardrails in for sure, but then figure out how we leverage it to stay ahead of those who don't leverage it.
Yeah, I'll agree with you a lot on that, Michael. One of the things I'll say is that a couple things. Number one, AI is not new. It is, depending on who you read, 50 to 60 years old. What has changed in the last few years is the democratization of AI. It sits in everybody's pocket now. This is analogous to the fact that the internet existed long before the web browser, but when the web browser came out, it made it accessible to everybody. And cell phones existed long before the iPhone came out, and now that's changed everything. So I think AI is going to be a web browser or a mobile phone type disruption. I don't think we're yet seeing the major use cases of it. I do think it is predominantly productivity, enhancement, efficiency, but I do think over the next couple of years, we're going to kind of see a different explosion of it, and I do agree we need to lean into it. Technology is neutral. It favors neither the aggressor nor the defender. Rather, it's the one that adopts technology more quickly and traverses the OODA loop faster will usually be the one to emerge on the better side of it.
I'm sensing a theme. Being proactive is a good thing, and I think that in some cases, if you're prepared, your business, your company can, enter new markets, adopt new technology in their products, all of these things, and do it with a better understanding and forethought of the risk and the opportunities, because it sounds like you're seeing lots of opportunities along with the risk. So one of the things that makes me think of, Adam, is the agentic AI is going to be hugely productive. So AI now very good at identifying patterns, identifying things that humans would get bored at waiting months to look at patterns over long periods of time. Humans get tired on Friday, they've got to go home, their kids got a football practice, whatever, and I'll get to that issue on Monday, and by Monday, you wish you hadn't come into the office. So I think that, there are benefits to this. This is sort of a next stage in, it's a smarter automation, AGI predictions aside. So any other comments on how technology is impacting your companies or steps that you're taking?
We're taking kind of I'm trying to take a slower approach. I'm a little less enthusiastic about the AI at the moment, mostly because I have people coming out of the woodwork saying, we have to try this thing. I'm like, but you don't know what you're trying. You're just trying to, try the new shiny thing. So as we go through, I'm treating it kind of like cloud 15 years ago. I think it's going to be a big thing, and it already is, right? But we have to understand what we're doing with it, what the controls are, what happens to the data. We had a sister company a few years back that was very big in cloud and encouraged everyone to do cloud and spin up something in the cloud and go do everything there. And then once the shine wore off, they left it, and a lot of websites and different containers and things were left abandoned, and they were hacked recently because of it. They left things open, people forgot about it, no one cleaned it up. And so I'm trying to get ahead of that, and we don't have some of the guardrails yet that Michael talked about, and they're just saying, we got to turn this on, we got to turn on Copilot, we got to see ChatGPT, and like, for what, right? help me understand the use case, and we'll go through it, because we're all trying to catch up with it, and it's not just a shiny thing to turn on and then forget about. If we're going to do it, let's look into it properly as a company, as an entity, and look at all the controls and what it can do, and step into it. It'll be there tomorrow, right? But let's do it properly and slowly, and I'm just trying to slow everybody down.
I presume that you've all put out policies on AI or other technologies, you know, like when the iPhone came out and we had to deal with mobile devices and BYOD and things like that. We had to put policies together. We have to set that baseline, train our employees on expectations, and then, you know, monitor and put in tools so that so the shadow IT is at least detected and minimized. Let's move on to another area that's always changing, regulatory changes and governance. Regulations and standards that might be impacting your company, breach reporting, different regulations like CMMC. Are you seeing the regulatory landscape, is it looking different this year and next year than it was last year? Is that moving in a direction where you're keeping up with it?
I would characterize, I don't think we have the luxury of not striving to keep up with it. But I think, as you just described, kind of where we've come historically, where we are today, where we're going in the future is subject to change. I think given some of the shifts in the geopolitical dynamics that are unfolding, I think we're going to start to see a number of provincial regulators starting to take a more active approach to manage cyber. And that's going to create a challenge for large global organizations, right? The example being around cyber security disclosures. In one country, it's a 4-hour notice period. In another, it's 24 hours. But yet, when we work to negotiate with our vendors, right, they're like, I can't tell you within anything less than 72, right? Those things don't align, and it's going to just continue to create challenge for us to understand how we're going to manage that risk within our own organizations, holistically across the ecosystem, and maintain those relationships with local regulators. We don't have the luxury anymore, I think, of just building a relationship with a primary regulator that's local to our headquarters. We have to really foster relationships in all the different areas where we have regulatory oversight.
Yeah, and you know, regulations are lagging, to say the least. I think there's, you know, one of my classes I teach the progression of cyber security regulations and laws over a period of time, and it's all out there. It's all saying the same thing. The technology changes, and then we put something else in there. But if you look at the basics, you do the basics right, you're going to meet the regulations. It's one thing to try to be compliant and then say I'm secure. It's another thing to be secure and then be able to show how you're compliant, right? And that's the approach I recommend to folks. But I think if we just enforce what's already out there, we'll meet any regulation. You look at the back of some of the reference models and some of the frameworks, and they all map to how they meet the other regulations. The problem is we got a lot of smart people in DC and other places who like to write up documents. I'm one of them. But quite honestly, if we just enforce what we currently have, I think we'll meet these. And nowadays, you can use AI to do just that.
If I can build on that, right? We have a lot, CME participates in a lot of industry organizations. And the challenge I see when it comes to regulation is folks try to harmonize terminology, and really all they end up doing is creating yet another standard. And so I know I personally have just tried to be a big proponent to say, let's pick a standard. If it's NIST, if it's ISO, whatever it is, let's align on that terminology as opposed to trying to harmonize it and creating a different language that we're going to subscribe to. And everything in our world, we try to do mapping. We've tried to simplify it internally. We have a small group of people who understand all those control requirements, can map it to all the regulatory expectations and generate reporting on it. So we can be responsive to the regulator, but also keep life a little bit simpler for our internal practitioners and operators.
Yeah, and one other point, you know, the explaining to your board and things like that what these new regulations mean is an art in itself, right? To make sure that they understand that, one, they got the right people in the right place doing the right job, but when this thing comes out like disclosure we were just in a recent discussion with the steering committee, and we had the SEC come in and talk to us about the rules changes and what they mean, and what does materiality mean, and what does, it was just a quite interesting thing, and I gave them a scenario, and they said, listen, if I chose to pay a ransom, and I think it's immaterial, do I have to report that? And it was an interesting discussion that went from there. And I want to just put it out there. I want to digress into how the whole thing turned out. But then they also have people who are hacking organizations, and then they call the SEC and said, hey, by the way, we hacked them and they didn't disclose it. What do you do then, right? So these are some really interesting things to be on top of if you're thinking about the regulations from that perspective, and what does it mean to your organization, right? What does it mean to not have an enterprise risk management function in place, but have to adhere to these types of things when we talk about cyber defenses? So I think it's a lot of complexity there. And the last thing I'll say about the regulations, I'll pass on this one second.
I think in some ways, some things haven't changed that much. I started in banking in the mid-90s, and I just did a webinar last week about fraud prevention, and there's a lot of know your customer and checking different things, how the transactions go, and some of the technology course is newer than it was, back then, but it's the same process, right? And as far as some of the regulations, I don't have the regulators in as often, as I worked at a bank that I do now. So it's a lot more self-reporting, right? We have to kind of monitor things, and it's as our clients come in and ask us for due diligence, and how do we tell them we're safe? Being able to report to them or our parent company, here's what we're doing, here's why we think we're meeting this control, showing the evidence. So it's a lot of, kind of doing our own work and having it ready for when people ask. But being a small company, it was essentially operating at proverbial garage for a long time, trying to get people up and maturing that to say, no, we've been doing some things, now we have to document it and make it available and share it. And we didn't have an enterprise risk management when I joined, right? But as an insurance company, they've been doing risk management forever. That's what we do. But so formalizing a document and putting cyber part of that was an educational process.
And I think that's important as you're dealing with different regulators. There's part of what the gap is with regulation is practicality and operational efficiency. We recently were in the European Union, and our Netherlands regulator asked us to do a threat-led Tiber exercise. So we do a red team every year with a third party. The engagement's usually about 12 to 16 weeks, from collecting threat intel, designing, testing, report write-up. We've optimized it. That regulator's like, no, it can't be less than 9 months.
Wow.
And I said, okay, so we've been doing threat-led pen testing for the last 10 years. What accommodations can you give to our organization that maybe we can move faster? The regulator says, we can't. You have to do a minimum of 12 weeks of just testing. And we're like, no, we can have the whole thing done in 12 weeks. And it's a factor of, as you deal with different regulators, they don't have the same level of expertise or incentive to be efficient as we move through there. We also struggle at times as we're moving to Google Cloud. The regulators come in, they don't understand Google Cloud, right? So I spend a lot of time actually training and educating the regulators on the language of Google and being able to equate it to how does it work in AWS or Azure, just because their technicians, their examiners, I should say, don't have the luxury of training that we make for our people. And so it creates a unique dynamic that, one, we have the requirements, we can do the mapping, but then we get examined by people who don't have the hands-on experience, and we have to help them understand how we've managed the risk, how we've put the control in place, how we've tested it, how we monitor, operate it. And it's a burden that you have to take on as you go through it, but ultimately, if you just accept that's the reality of the situation, commit to it, it really improves the relationship with the regulator.
I'd add it too real quickly. There is the education. You can push back on people, true, right, as you're doing. They'll come in and say it has to be this way, and sometimes it's a set of controls that maybe a junior person's testing that doesn't really understand what they're looking for, and they're just following the check box or completing the Excel document. And trying to sit with them or maybe a more senior person saying, this is what we're doing, that's why we think it makes sense, and we're not going to do a 9-month exam because that would crush us. But we can do it 10 weeks, or we think this meets the objective, and help us understand why it doesn't, and usually you can get there.
And when I suggest that it's the same problem, Jim Instrom, who's the chief auditor over at the Chicago Board Options Exchange, and myself, 11 years ago, created a course at DePaul for just this reason, to bring auditors together with cybersecurity practitioners. And now we have an element of the law school that's part of this program as well. And this was what we were going after. We had a lot of naive folks coming in to audit. We got folks in audit that don't understand cybersecurity. We got cybersecurity folks that don't understand the auditing control objectives. And we created this course, and it's been just an awesome course to have. And the folks that meet through this, and then they go off into their profession, and they know one another. But this is exactly the problem we wanted to solve. But then again, it all rolls back up to the audit committee. And Bob, I'm not going to steal your thunder. I'm going to let you talk about this. But is the audit committee the right committee to talk about risk management, right? And this is where we struggle in the organization is, you know, I've done contracts reporting right to the audit committee and then having to have this explanation of you know, audit and compliance is a 1 or a 0. I do it or I don't. And then risk management is, you know, 4 different things I can do. I can accept it, I can manage it, I can reduce it. And this is the concept that, you know, I know executives do this intuitively all the time, but explaining this in the context of this audit finding, this cyber risk, and what it means to the organization's business, that's the fun part where the art comes in.
My regulatory experience has been a little bit different. This is my first time being in a highly regulated industry, financial services. We are a federally insured national credit union, and our auditors, we are regulated by the NCUA, the National Credit Union Association, or Administration, excuse me. They are not prescriptive, but they are very principle-based. So they come in and they'll say, tell us how you're going to protect your members, because we are member-owned. And what is your framework for doing it? And are you doing what you say you're doing? And so that's the cardinal sin, is if we tell them we're doing something and they find out we're not doing it. That's the fastest way to get into trouble with them. The second thing they'll come in then, and let's say we're doing what we say we're doing, is they are very, very good about finding gaps. Well, you need to do this, you need to do this. And they carry a lot of weight. I know there's a lot of debate right now about the CISO reporting relationship. You know, should it be in the CIO or somewhere else? We moved. We were under the CIO, and we moved out of it, specifically at the direction of the NCUA, because they wanted the cyber risk organization to have that independence. So it's really interesting. Our auditors, I can't speak for all auditors, but they are very sharp. You can't really pull much over them. They will find it quickly. But usually, as long as you have a really good story, you're working on it, they're usually going to be pretty supportive of you. That's been my experience.
All right, I want to move on to a small topic, third-party risk management. By its very nature, it creates contention between the buyer and the seller. The buyer wants complete transparency, is never satisfied with the results, and wants everything at a discounted price. So, panel, what tangible steps can we take to drive improvements in the buyer-seller relationship while still mitigating risks to our organization, systems, and operations?
So I'll jump in here. I've really encouraged my, it's CME Group, third-party risk management, is owned by the Enterprise Risk Management Group. I have security practitioners, dedicated security practitioners that support that process. And for me, what I've gotten into is to move away from the checklists. Part of the challenge we have is in CME, right, our customers, we have a couple of national global banks that every year we get a spreadsheet with the same 300 questions we have to fill out. And I'm like, just so we're clear, I'm critical infrastructure, you're critical infrastructure, we sit in the same meetings at Treasury, right? I'm subject to all the same requirements you are. Is this spreadsheet really valuable? Your answer is fill it out. And so, which we do, because they're a big customer. But for me, when we get into dilemmas, for me, I end up saying, let's get on the phone with their CISO. Let's have a conversation. Had a situation recently where we used certain tools to monitor vendors, and we had a new vendor coming through, and we looked and found a lot of critical vulnerabilities they had open on the internet. And when we contacted them to say, can you explain these to us? What I was looking for was principles-based discussion. Yes, that's a risk. It's in an old environment. We're cleaning it up. We expect to have it deprecated. I looked for them to take ownership of the risk and articulate what they were doing. And what we got back was, there's nothing to see there. What service you're going to consume is running over here in a different environment. Strike one, right? Went back to talk to them about, hey, explain to me how you're doing, penetration and AppSec testing. And their answer was, well, we do this type of AppSec application testing, but we don't do pen tests because we run in the cloud. Strike two, right? And so as we went through there, we quickly got to, as you can imagine, we quickly got to strike three, and we went to the business and said, we don't think this is somebody you should do business with. They don't own security. You want to share highly sensitive information with them. We don't have confidence they have control. So before I even send the spreadsheet to them, my advice to you is, do you have another vendor to work with? And the business appreciated that. They went another route. That vendor actually called me and said, what happened? We thought we were having a productive conversation. We'd have done anything for you guys. My answer was, own security at your organization. I'm a highly regulated entity. I'm going to give you highly sensitive information, and you guys aren't demonstrating to me that you own the security in your organization. They found that valuable. I've been able to connect them with a couple of vendors, and I said, 12 to 18 months, if the business is willing to consider you again, you can come back through the process, but I'm going to need to see a big change in the level of maturity and ownership you all have. That's one microcosm of the thousands of vendor discussions that we have across our organization. And so for me, the dilemma is trying to get third parties that will explain how they are managing security on our behalf. I'm not staffed to manage security control at all those suppliers. I need them to take ownership so we can establish a solid partnership. And it's a challenge because, especially if we go back to the discussion about Gen AI, the hype of that, we had vendors show up, congratulations, our next release has all the Gen AI you're ever gonna need. Hey, can we turn it off? Whoa, what do you mean you want to turn it off? I'm like, I don't know what you built. I don't know how it's going to integrate with the rest of my systems. We need to have a conversation. And it really has shifted some of the dynamics with some of those third-party relationships coming in to understand how when they add new functionality that I didn't ask for, how that may or may not really meet with our risk appetite.
I'm sure that doesn't happen for anybody else. And I'm sure nobody else has to fill out customer questionnaires.
That's all we do.
For this customer, everybody does, apparently, so.
We, being a smaller company, as I think the last two places I've been have been, we're limited resources, right? And so there's the conversation of where we should report, but I have infrastructure and service desks. So in addition to third-party risk and reviewing contracts and other CISO-y things, I also have to, make sure the help desk tickets are getting closed and infrastructure's running. And so it's a small team doing many things. So one of the approaches we took is we're going to complete the questionnaire as we can, and we try to push back with SIGs and various documents that we can say, here's this thing, go take a look at it. But we're not going to have a lot of leeway pushing back on Microsoft and AWS and other things. So we're looking at the smaller vendors that we can have an impact with that do mean more to us. Because even if we found a whole bunch of stuff with Microsoft, they're not going to change a whole lot for us, right? So we're looking at the smaller vendors that we can really work with that have who are critical to us for one reason or another, and we can have the conversation, say, we need you to own this better. We need better products or better services and more security, and we think you can do this and that. And they're open to that, and that works for us. We still go through and look at the Microsofts and the other companies, but again, it just doesn't get us a lot of traction. There's so much there, it's a big time sink.
So this is an area where I'm really glad regulation got on top of this because it really sent a lot of business my way. Where we had to work with folks to get their SOC 2 Type 2 because in order to keep their highly regulated clients, they had to prove that they could get a SOC 2 and maintain it. And that was a lot of work for us, and thank God. But if anyone has ever had to go in and set up a third-party risk management piece, and you had to review SOC 2s, now that's an art in itself there. Typically you get one and the product that the company's providing for you is not even in the scope of the document. Management attestation is not even there. You don't have a security professional confirming that these controls are there. You ask who was the CPA, turns out it was somebody's brother-in-law at the small organization. So it really is an interesting area, but I think the biggest challenge for us in some of the larger groups I'm working with, in one business area alone, there's 4,000 suppliers and vendors, right? How do you get on top of that? And then the security folks being integrated in the process typically get brought in after that contract's already signed. And then you go in and say, hey, I recommend not using this vendor. And they're like, well, we're already locked into a 5-year contract, so what are we supposed to do? And in this one organization, 2 of the vendors used to be clients of mine. And I recall telling these vendors, hey, you really got to get on top of this if your larger client finds out. And so I had to recuse myself from the assessments, but knew that they were going to walk them out and couldn't tell them they were going to get walked out, which is the other thing. Good friends with the CEO can't say you're going to get walked out, but then 6 months later, they made the call. So it's an interesting area, and I think if you don't get procurement, contracts, security, all these different people on the same page on how you're going to do this and how you manage it, it's going to remain pretty complex.
I think treating things at the enterprise levels, kind of standardizing across departments and not operating in silos, I think those are good comments. You had something to say, Dan?
I was just going to build on the comment of reporting structure, which is, at CME, I report to the CIO, and we've had a lot of debate of should I report elsewhere. I got to be honest, the way I run my program, I don't care who I report to, right? I have to build controls that protect and defend the environment. That's an HR decision on who I report to. If I see a problem, I have to be comfortable that I can pick up the phone and call the CFO, the president, the CEO, and articulate that there's a problem. And I've had honest conversations with my boss to go, I got a new boss 3 years ago, and I'm like, as long as we have a healthy discussion, we'll get to the right business outcome. But if I ever feel like you're not acting in the best interest of security for the organization, I would just want you to know I'm going to pick up the phone and go to the CEO. And I told him that proactively, and we've never had a problem. And it's a factor of understanding. I think I feel, at least in my current organization with our culture, I benefit being within technology because I feel like I can influence from inside. There are as a consultant at other organizations I was in, I'm like, no, you got to pull that function out of the tech org. They got to be separate, independent, just because of the personality dynamics. So I appreciated the comment earlier today that was very adamant of CISO reporting to the risk organization, but I don't think that's right in every instance as you get into it, especially with a regulated organization. As long as you can demonstrate you're able to operate with some degree of independence and you've got leadership support from the top, I think you can navigate it.
All right, I'd like to move to the audience to see if anyone has any questions. Does anyone have any final comments here?
Yeah, just one observation. Everybody's talking about what they're going to do with AI when it gets here. I got news for you. As a professor, and I give essays for midterms and finals, everybody in that classroom comes back with an AI-generated response to my essay questions, and MLA has a very hard time keeping up with it. The point here is that we are training armies of people coming out of the universities who know nothing but how to use AI. And that's how you got to shift your workforce going forward. It's not going to be the knowledge worker. It's going to be who knows how to use those tools the best, can tweak them, have them operate to put efficiency in your organization and to make you more innovative. So just think differently. A lot of us, somebody said earlier, we got a lot of gray hair up here, but the kids today, they've been born on these things, they live on these things, they're connected to headphones, and they're running AI all the time. It's already here. If you're waiting, you're behind the times.
I'm just going to add to that quickly.
I think you mentioned that you have your students have no notes on their exam because you want them to actually write the essays. And that's an issue with, our employees as well, right? That they're starting to turn in PowerPoints that were generated by AI. All right, were you going to say something, Dan, or Adam?
Oh, yeah, just to add on to what Michael was saying, there's a lot of talk about, will AI displace human jobs? I don't know what it'll be in the long term, but at least for a while, I don't think AI is going to replace a human's job, but a human that understands how to capitalize and leverage AI may replace a human that doesn't know how to leverage the AI.
All right, do we have any questions in the audience? JC?
I saw this in academia when I worked in academia where there was everyone was averse to Wikipedia, but it was a good start for a lot of people. Now, averse to AI. But some of the things that we're looking with students is, in cyber specifically, is teaching critical thinking. If AI is one of the tools that's out there, are we the impediment to the students now saying that embrace this and use it in a more powerful way so that the average can become superhuman in their work? Because that's what we're missing in our discipline, but it seems like we're countering the progress out there. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yes.
Yeah, I was at a CISO customer advisory board recently, and somebody shared they ran an experiment in their organization. They took their most senior threat hunter and matched him up against a couple of their young analysts, and they ran two scenarios. One was just straight up competition, two young analysts against one senior. As you would expect, the senior threat hunter did tremendous. They gave those two analysts Gen AI, and they ran the scenario again, and they almost beat the senior guy. And so it shows that you can really lift your capabilities of your organization. But I just generally have concerns about critical thinking, right? Human nature is, as we get more comfortable with Gen AI, we're not going to scrutinize what Gen AI gives us. We're going to take it as accurate, hit send on that email that gets drafted or the report that gets prepared, especially if you're doing any kind of financial analysis in a spreadsheet. Nobody's going through to check the formulas, right? We're going to take for granted that it's accurate. And so that's the biggest challenge, because right now, as we're rolling it out, the key control is the human in the middle. Over time, that's going to be impossible to really enforce, I think.
But simultaneously, you got threats like Black Mamba, look it up later, which is a polymorphic AI that's attacking organizations. Once it understands what tools you have in place, it's throwing false flags, it's seeing your people searching over there while it's doing something over here. And that's the new threat, right? We're thinking some guy in his grandma's basement with a hood on. No, everything is automated. All the bots are scanning the internet constantly. You put something out there, it's compromised in 10 seconds if you haven't put it out there. And now they've got tools that understand how we defend that is automatically working against us. And this is AI.
Yeah, the teenager in their parents' basement wearing a hoodie is so 20th century. All right, we'll end here. I want to please thank our panel and thank you for your participation. I believe we have lunch being served.
John, quick.
And we return at 1 o'clock for our next presentation. And is lunch being served out here, or do we go somewhere? If you head out there, you'll get directed to the right place.
Hey,
All right,
quick public service announcement, probably to a panelist. There's a phone up here.
Also, I have an AI roundtable, CISO roundtable and dinner in Rosemont tomorrow night. If anyone's interested, please see me.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, the suite, CISO's coordinate meetings that go all
Yeah. I'm so disappointed that I had to coach you guys so much. You didn't have anything to say.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Everyone came well prepared. Of course, it's just telling the story of what you do every day. So
Yeah, that'd be good. Sure. Hey, Tom.
Yep.
I loved your photo from the airplane. Oh.
So congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
I'd like to, so I teach at Northwestern.
Yep.
And follow up this year, but next year, if you're up to it.
Yeah. My daughter graduates from Northwestern in June. I live in Evanston, about 2 miles from the campus, so I'm happy to do it.
So, yeah, that my agenda, so I also have guest speakers talk about this. So,
yeah, be glad to.
What we teach you next year.
That'll be good. I'm heading over to your alternate location. I'm going to Belfast next week, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, just north of, do you have a card?
I do.
So I give you your contact.
You're heading out to RSA.
Yeah.
What?
Just ask to speak into the microphones, and then
Yep, works.
works. Don't move too far away from it though, because it won't pick you up if you sit way back. If you're comfortable,
Well, then
feel
I'll just
free
hold
to
the
take
mic.
it out of the holder and hold it up so that you can talk, because we want everybody to be able to hear you.
Do you want to do any Q&A or just run through the questions?
Whatever you want. You know, I'm chill.
We
I
got
don't care.
30 minutes, right? Miss, if we wanted to do some. Ma'am? Okay. Well.
Wow.
29 and holding.
I wish.
Are the other, if we want to
They
do
will
Q&A
come.
with the audience?
If you want, I don't
If-
normally have someone, you can take the microphone off the holder.
Ooh, that works.
Yeah. And go into the audience to ask.
That works for me.
Do they all work?
All right, thank
But
you.
The other
don't want
ones
to throw off
don't
the
work.
cameras.
That's all right, they're only focused
The other
on
ones
you.
don't work.
They don't go out.
See, we could make this a circus real easy.
If you want, we can turn that on. I just don't have it on. Okay?
I see that you're doing your best effort there to make it so.
Sure. All right.
Okay, is everyone nice and full? We're fed from post lunch. Everyone's ready to lock in for the next panel we have? Great, love that. Okay, so now we will have a fireside chat with Ricardo here, who I will briefly introduce, and Laszlo. Thank you both for joining us. Currently the CISO with Kraft Heinz, Ricardo's career has encompassed over 16 years of senior level technical management and consultative positions in government, healthcare, and educational, financial services, and legal services. Ricardo has architected innovative and successful incident management, risk management, application security programs, data protection policies, and cloud security vendor assessment and frameworks. Proven leadership, project management, mentor, negotiation, and problem-solving skills have all been demonstrated throughout his career. So thank you for joining us. Wonderful.
All right.
You did all that?
No.
Laszlo here is the CEO of Next Era Transformation Group and is a seasoned leader in cybersecurity, AI, ML, digital risk, and technology strategy across diverse industries. A sought-after keynote speaker, as you can see here, thank you for joining us, and advisor, he excels in guiding organizations through digital transformation, leveraging AI, ML to enhance capabilities, and cybersecurity to protect operations. Laszlo has advised 14 1,000 companies, nonprofits, and organizations across multiple sectors, empowering them to integrate technology innovations, develop revenue strategies, and address the complexities of cyber and AI risks to achieve competitive advantages. I will not hold us back any further so that we can hear from both of them. I'm sure this will be a great fireside chat. So help me welcome them with a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Tyler. I want to know who the PR person that wrote that thing. So it always sounds so much better on paper. So, Rico.
Hi.
It's been about time. We've been on stage together for a while.
It has.
You have an impressive career leading to that bio that we had. So in 2021, remember that? you were named the Chicago CISO of the Year.
Oh, that, yeah.
That little thing. Can you share a little bit about your journey into the CISO position?
Yeah.
What got you started in this blasted industry that we're stuck in?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And thanks for hearing us rant for the next 30 minutes. The bar is open as well, so definitely if you get bored, just go on. Okay, so that's a fantastic question. So I started my cybersecurity career in video games. I was a, who got the Teams notification?
Nice.
That was awesome. In video games, so back in the day, I'm gonna age myself. EDO RAM, anyone here? I worked a very long time to buy one stick of EDO RAM, not knowing I have to buy them in pairs. And that pissed me off so much that I found ways to manipulate the operating system to remove hardware checks so I could play my video game. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And that curiosity just kept on bleeding into a career into cybersecurity. And you're like, all right, fine. Everyone does weird stuff like that. But what really got you into the CISO role? And this is, I'm very petty. I will hold grudges forever for the smallest things. And I remember my first career as a SOX 404 auditor, absolutely nightmare of a job. But I remember my boss treating me like complete crap. Like just dirt. I was just a cog in the cybersecurity machine. I was treated like crap, so were my colleagues. And I took a step back. I was like, first, no one deserves to be treated like garbage, regardless of your position, regardless of anyone in that position. I was like, if this is what cybersecurity is, damn it, I'm going to make it better. So I continuously started growing. I understood that I need to have the governance side, I had the technical side, and I started bridging it together. So throughout my career, I had a step ladder in different higher level positions, and I had a personal goal to be a CISO by the age of 30. And on my right before my 30th birthday, I had my first CISO gig as the Department of Homeland Security at Cook County, which was my goal because I knew if I got that level of governance, influence, I was able to trickle down those changes. And the way I was from a pen tester to how I am now, I am who I am, and I refuse to change for anyone, because if you can't be authentic and candid with other individuals, then what's it worth being out there and being part of a CISO? So that was my career. Those were my aspirations to become a CISO. So I love to have fun. Security's really, really depressing, onerous. There's some highlights, there's some lowlights, but that's why you have to have fun. That's how I am now is how I am with the board, not with the rabbit ears or cat ears, but you know, you gotta have fun with it.
Love the stories. The theme of the conference today is Mastering Organizational Risk, Connecting the Dots. The theme of the, there we go. Is that loud enough? Mastering Organizational Risk, Connecting the Dots. And I'm sure we all have baskets of stories following the bunny ear theme. As an experienced CISO with plenty of stories to share, how do you ensure risk decisions are aligned across the business units, especially within large global enterprise? I know I struggle a lot when we talk about IT versus the business. I don't like that. We are all part of the business. Now, how do we have that conversation and include them in that risk discussion?
Yeah, great question. Your best ally in these risk discussions are a fun little thing called the Enterprise Risk Committee, or some sort of committee as such. When I first started at Kraft Heinz, we did not have one. It was kind of like ad hoc. I would partner with internal audit and other key stakeholders that helped me get better alignment with the business and understand the risk. But what ultimately came of this is understanding what our true risk tolerance is, and we drew the line in the sand and saying, this is our acceptable level of risk as an organization. We had input from the business, we had input from the technical side, and also being manufacturing, input from the operational side. It's like, what an acceptable level of downtime in a specific plant based on X number of revenue. So we had those three inputs to determine what that acceptable level of risk is. So we were all speaking the same language. So having that proper taxonomy, instead of going in and talking about vulnerabilities, we maybe spoke about downtime, what a vulnerability could transcend into a downtime in a given plant, post-compensating controls. I think the really aha moment was when I
was telling our head of operations that runs pretty much all of our plants, hey, do you know what our risk tolerance is? He's like, absolutely. And he started to understand the different types of taxonomies on what risk is and how a vulnerability could impact a production line. So once we got that level of understanding, it was a lot easier to have those conversations, not just from an investment perspective, but when you're accepting risk. Security does not accept risk. Re-highlighting that for everyone. Security never accept risk. We're just guidance. We're just providing guidance on it. And it was just really awe-inspiring to have everyone together, being able to talk about risk and everyone being on the same page. Again, that was like a 2 or 3 year journey. It did not happen overnight. There was a lot of resistance, but being able to have that key stakeholder influence and speaking the same language is absolutely crucial to your success.
You raise an excellent set of points here. That is, a lot of young women and young men over the years, I've always said in the cybersecurity space, we identify risk. We analyze the risk. We present the risk. We do not accept the risk on behalf of anybody else. But I've never signed anything, actually, in my entire career that accepts risk. It is the team. It is the business.
You signed that love letter to me, though.
I'll have to see a copy of that. Did AI create that? Cute.
Got him.
You got me. But no, excellent points about risk appetite, risk tolerance, an acceptable level of risk. Because executives or the board or the C-suite has the option to accept the risk as it is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually acceptable. But our job is to point out that risk.
Yep.
You've been recognized for creating a risk-aware culture. We just heard that. And your influence at the board level. How do you approach communicating cybersecurity and the enterprise risk in ways that truly resonate with executive leadership and directors? And I bring up, we're seeing like large organizations or even mid-sized organizations now laying off cybersecurity teams. So how do we have this conversation as the risk landscape with new technologies, which will continue? We've got AI now, we're going to have what comes after AI, that sort of stuff. What does risk managing, I call it dynamic risk management. Mm-hmm. What does that look like, and how do we communicate that in a business language?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can give you a primer of primer of how we highlight risk to the business, or more importantly to the board. First part is enterprise risk management. So we spoke about that committee, all the fun hoopla that happens over there. But within those meetings, I also build those key allies that are also board members or annexes to the overall audit committee. But what we highlight on the board every quarter, I forget when I go. I'm going next week, so whenever that is. We highlight high level, what I call sit rep, going back to my Army Corps days, situational awareness, what's going on. So your typical, what's our phishing click rate? What's our report rate? And they understand because over the years we've trained why this is important. So there's pre-meetings that provide additional context to those board reports. Yes, vulnerability management is absolutely on the board deck, but not from a, oh my God, the sky is falling, but more from a trend perspective. Are we trending positively, negatively amongst our peers from total vulnerabilities per asset for a given industry? So you provide it in the context of the business we're in and the type of vulnerabilities that could impact our industry. And then I also go down into special topics. So every quarter we highlight a special topic given on the threat landscape. I think the last 2 years, every single quarter has had a stupid AI-related conversation because it's in the news, and we need to make sure we're highlighting how we're addressing it, what we're doing about it, because I want to preempt them before they ask me the question. So if I'm providing them relevant information on what we're doing internally, what safeguards we're putting in, what guardrails we're doing, it helps provide additional context to them. And it's all in the framework of how we're either building guardrails, how we're reducing risk. It's not very technical in terms, but more from going back to the risk appetite perspective.
I love the word guardrails. I've used that myself a lot of times. We're not trying to be the no, but what we're trying to give is the guardrails you can operate with it
which works within the risk tolerance that the organization has set. Once you go outside those guardrails, then that's when the little red alarms start to go off. And we're like, well, let's take a look at the risk that you just created. We would like to keep this session interactive, so before I go on to my next question, do any of you have a question of Ricardo before? Yes? No?
Oh, can we just pick people randomly too?
Michael, I'm going to pick on you.
Yeah, Mike.
Walter, you can run a lot faster than me.
I'll be your runner, and you can get another microphone.
Hello, Ricardo.
Hey, Mike.
So the question I have is, when the organization has multiple business divisions, and they all have different risk tolerance levels, how do you make your report make sense so that it appeals to each of those in the situation where you don't have an enterprise risk management function, and you're pretty much responding to compliance-oriented interest, right?
Yeah, well, we'll talk about the disparate business units first. So that is a lot of legwork is what it is. Hence why we needed to create the Enterprise Risk Enterprise Risk Committee, ERC. And why we did that is we have about 10 different disparate business units, all have multiple business units going into them, that all had very different risk profiles and different risk tolerances. For example, manufacturing was very different than marketing. Marketing was very different than HR. So being able to have to go to each of them, understanding where their critical information is, what their tolerance is for an acceptable loss, and are they allowed to have are they allowed to decide that acceptable loss? And most of the time, you can't have that at the business level. They'll say, oh, absolutely, we can expose all the PI. It doesn't hurt us that much. They're not allowed to make that determination. But being able to capture that information and bubble it up to the next level, to the executive leadership team, is really where those decisions are made. So being able to do all the legwork across the board, I'd say probably every quarter would take us probably 2 weeks to just prep, get the information, understand the current position, hence why we created the Enterprise Risk Committee, to have that next layer up and have people feed into it and then make a very aggregate level of risk. It's a little more weighted for the data side outside the operation side because of just the nature of the business. So our acceptable level of risk was determined with an influence of availability and then the data behind it, just because of the nature of our business. I already forgot the second half of your question.
This journey to get to enterprise, often happening from a cyber risk perspective, is the one that I've had to do several times. It's different no matter where you go.
Yep.
And it's always interesting, but it's the hardest thing to rationalize to people that it has to happen. You have to get that maturity to talk about enterprise risk, and then even more so, how you get that enterprise strategic risk.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one thing that did help, and it makes me not the happiest person, but it was a good side benefit, was the SEC notification requirements. Yes, they were tough. Yes, they were very ambiguous. Everyone had their own interpretation of it. But that helped us align the Enterprise Risk Committee on, yes, this is our absolute materiality threshold. This is how we calculate it. So even though we had our initial risk threshold, that reinforced on how we do those calculations. So it became a lot more quantitative than qualitative, which was a good side benefit of it.
Great question. Love the answer.
Way to go, Mike. Daniel. Oh, all right. Daniel's next, and then Paulie for fun.
It's Steve Weber here. Thanks, Ricardo. Great for sharing some stuff with us. A question. The Ricardo today, in your role, is there one or two things you would tell Ricardo from when you assumed your current position with your current employer?
Yeah.
One or two things that you would reflect and say, hey, here's.
Absolutely. Have badass Excel skills. Don't learn them on the fly. It is my favorite cybersecurity tool, hands down. And two, working really well in statistics and budgeting. It's been quite the journey. I would probably want to say 30 to 40% of my job is budget. Budget, finance is really a good chunk of my job, and I think as I got further into larger organizations, I was like, oh, I wish I was really good at this. Now I've learned how to deal with it, how to function with it. Every organization does their own craziness. We, being an old 3G shop, love ZBB. So if you've ever been in a ZBB shop, it is like weirdo budgeting. So you really rip your budget apart every single year and rebuild it from the ground up. So you just imagine how much fun that is every year. But now on my 5th year here, it's like clockwork, but being able to understand how the financials and the budgeting works in organizations is really crucial. So those are the 2 tips I would tell myself. Yeah, nothing super exciting. Yeah.
How are we doing on time? I know we had a late start. Okay.
Daniel had a question, and then Polly looks upset.
You know what? I'm going to put my questions down, and we're going to go to
Yeah, this is fun. And this is like a long table, it's like interrogation. This is awesome.
I'm going back to the risk conversation you just had before. So you mentioned that somebody asked about how do you get people to sign off on things, and you have levels and like what they can sign off on. How do you go about quantifying what level that risk is that you ask that person to sign off on? Like, I assume you're not doing it on a vulnerability level. You probably like do it on like a control gap or something like something bigger.
Yeah. So what we decided to do is, so you have multiple control gaps, and then they feed into an aggregate risk, and then that aggregate risk becomes our our 5 or 6 key risk indicators. That's all we present to the Enterprise Risk Committee, and we show them how the delicious, awesome Oscar Mayer hot dog is created by putting in all the different inputs to it, and then we tell them all the risks associated with those KRIs and let them decide on the action. We give them recommendations, and they decide what happens. Because we're not going to sit there with our chief global counsel, we're not with our global CFO and talk about, hey, this one server has a critical vulnerability. Zero context. I'll probably get punched in the face. No. No. Yep.
So question, how much has cybersecurity influenced the innovation strategy or innovation cycle at Kraft?
I'd say with lovely Gen AI, I think we've done a really good job with the culture. And net new innovations, they come to us first, which I think is a really huge win. For example, they wanted to go right out of the gate with everything that smelled and looked like Gen AI. And we were able to pivot very quickly because we saw people starting to use it. We understood some of the risk behind it. But what we had to do is quickly create a steering council for AI, build out what the processes are, and we did it in less than a week or 2. Just to have something around it. Oh God, Todd's gonna ask something. Yeah, fine. But in short, the culture has really leaned to them coming to us to support a net new initiative instead of them doing it and then bringing us into the last minute. And I count that as just a win from a cultural perspective and where security is positioned in the organization in current state. So it's pretty cool.
Just want to know, where does cyber risk rank in your company, and why isn't it higher?
That was so lame. That's what you got? Really? You know what? Everyone gets a book on him, and he's going to sign every book. You like that? You like that? It is one of our top 10 risk in our 10K. I think it's number 6 or 4. I don't know. Why is it? Because our Enterprise Risk Committee has decided where it's at, and I provide the input for it, and they decide what ranking is. But it's in our top 10, is part of our 10K. We have the risk management component behind it as well. Ooh, what message was that?
I do not have access to that.
But yeah, it's 4 or 6. You can look it up. It's a public record. Good try, Todd.
All right, we're going to wrap this up.
Man, this was fun.
And I'll be blunt here. I have been bored with IT for the last 30 years till AI came around. It kind of rocked the boat for people. And I think the biggest thing here is change, and to be prepared for change. And change if not already on the J-hook, is on the J-hook, and AI, quantum, whatever comes next has increased the velocity of change. What advice do you have for us and in the audience? 2 or 3 things on how to prepare for this velocity of change and the risks that it brings with us.
Well, you're asking the wrong person because I embrace chaos and I love chaos. Roll with it.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, absolutely roll with it. If you fight it, it's going to find its way in the organization. It's going to leave you behind. Accept change. If you are just coasting, you're not learning, you're not being better, and you're also not helping your team grow as well. So being able to just thrive in chaos, I probably do it more than most should, but I love to have an exciting life.
I have to agree with you 100%. I thrive in chaos as well. And the crucible of fire creates the best innovation, the best change, because you have to make decisions with limited resources, limited time to, I love the OODA loop, by the way. It's understanding your environment and being able to pivot when you need to. So
absolutely.
Please, let's give a round of applause to Ricardo for sharing his time with us. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That was fun. Yeah. We're going to do a push-up challenge outside?
Thank you. That's for you.
I request our CISO friends to make an announcement, and every year our partner CISO of the year. And okay, Walter, please.
Greetings. If you're not already familiar with the Chicago CISO of the Year program, we are kicked off for our 2025 season. And the first thing I'm going to say is we have several past winners here. Could you stand up and raise your hand? Dan? Todd? Rico, where'd he go? So we're kicked off now. You can go to ChicagoCISOoftheyear.com, and there's a nomination form. Find the security leaders that you work with and respect and nominate them. It's a very intense program. You are judged by peers, and then you are judged by executives who are not in security. CEOs, COOs are like that. So the winners, they don't just fill out an application and walk away, and there's no like little committee that reads it and goes. You go through a written application and many